Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 881. To Defeat a Leviathan. Congratulations! Void Monster, Nebulous Lord, has evolved to an abysmal behemoth. Northern stared at the panel, his expression pallid and dazed. Nebulous Lord had evolved again, barely moments after becoming a destroyer. Isn't he getting a little too overpowered? A sudden chill crept up his spine. Fear settled in, not from some outside force, but from within. The monsters carried in his soul. They weren't just growing stronger. They were becoming a terrifying force that seemed to host some strange pathways to what Northern has no idea of. There was the Abyss Tyrant, too, and all the others. They would keep evolving, keep getting stronger, and the outcome would only grow more appalling. But, in the end, it all still aligned with his greater plan, one he had been silently pursuing since the rift in Sura. Since the day he was forced to kill young Ulzard. He had tried running from that memory, but never once had he let go of the vow born from it. All he could do now was move one step at a time. The step in front of him now was Ruffsburg. Lithia and its chaos were just noise, distractions beneath the weight of what truly mattered. Night had sunk into its deepest depth, nearing the crescendo of darkness before it would finally begin to ascend, peeling back just enough to let the day pierce through its black veil. Behind him, Paragon Rizel landed, his feet making no sound. He took a few steps forward to match Northern's pace. Northern's gaze remained locked on the magnified form of Nebulous Lord, now standing aloof and imposing, as if detached from the world. Only with effort did he pull his eyes away to face Rizel. Burning Storm looked worn, his entire frame ragged. One arm was missing, and yet, oddly, he was holding that very arm in his other hand, as if it was nothing out of place. Northern's face tightened in concern, but Rizel scoffed. "Pay me no heed. I'll be just fine." His attention shifted to the behemoth standing still in front of them. This, on the other hand, he turned back toward Northern. "Rel, what exactly are these things following you? Are you planning world destruction?" He gestured to where Abyss Tyrant and the rest loomed, silent and monstrous. "Why in all hells are you surrounded by so many power-broken monsters? What are you preparing for?" Northern smiled faintly. It was understandable. Of course the Paragon wouldn't get it. No one truly could. Even Northern himself had once questioned if he was just creating summons for the sake of it. Out of instinct, perhaps. But he knew better. Every summon had a purpose. Every monster had arrived in a moment of desperation, summoned by the need of the hour. Nebulous Lord, for example, had turned the tide when it mattered most in Luengard. Each one existed to fulfill a role, a contingency, a measure against what the world wasn't ready to face. They were his passive preparations, his quiet arsenal for the calamity looming on the horizon. Only those who had witnessed the horror in the Dark Continent, only those who had survived that rift and caught even a glimpse of the origin of chaos could begin to grasp the scale of it. If that thing ever touched the ground, the world would crumble. Civilization would rot into a vessel for Ragnarok, where chaos and blood weren't just concepts but laws, immutable, devouring. He didn't fully understand what origins truly were, not yet. But the sheer divinity of their presence, the unfathomable weight of the power they carried, was beyond comprehension, even his own. So he did what he could. He grew stronger not just by himself, but through everything at his disposal. Slowly, steadily. Every summon, every moment, every ounce of strength gained was progress. One fragment at a time. There was no need to rush. Right now, his only goal was to humiliate Ruffsburg. Northern tilted his head slightly, the smile still playing on his lips. "Well, let's just say, there's something I've seen, Something that leaves me restless until I've explored and grasped every core of power that exists in this world, and beyond. Burning Storm's gaze dulled, paling ever so slightly. Something you've seen, he echoed quietly, shaking his head. Whatever it is, I don't think I want to see it. He let out a short breath, trying to ground himself in lighter thoughts. Still, having someone like you as a friend is oddly reassuring. We are friends, right? Paragon Rizel offered a smile. Forced, a little uneven, a little shaky. Northern looked at him for a beat longer than necessary. He replied simply, I'm your mentee. There's still a lot I need to learn from you. Rizel chuckled, but the sound was hollow and laced with irony. He said, waving dismissively, Aha boy, please, don't mock me. Learn from me? You're not even a paragon yet, and I can't honestly say if I'd win in a fight against you. Not with all these things. His gaze swept across the silent horde of monsters looming in the distance. These creatures you command, I'd probably die 10 times over before I even touched the hem of your garment. Northern gave a light-hearted shrug. Come on, you can beat me up. Rizel's laughter returned, but it was tight, faintly bitter. So humble, Ral. So humble I could die. Northern held the smile a moment longer, then slowly raised his gaze to the sky. A glint of steel ignited in the depths of his azure eyes. Serious, distant, calculating. So, what exactly are we going to do about that? Paragon Rizel followed his gaze. His expression sobered as he too stared up at the endless night sky. Northern was right. The threat wasn't over. It hadn't even properly begun. They had to face a Leviathan. A damn Leviathan. A creature whose name alone bent the will of men. A rank of monster no paragon or even a sage should ever willingly face. Some might even say not without a luminary present. If they dared say anything at all. And yet, here they were. Burning Storm and Unwritten.
No luminari. No backup.
Just them and the shadows that stood at Northern's back. And somehow Rizel felt a sliver of belief take root in his chest. With the kinds of beings gathered here, strange, monstrous, divine, unexplainable, maybe, just maybe, they could do it. Defeat a Leviathan. Chapter 882. Forged by Warmth. The first thing they did was return to the heart of the city, where the city hall stood. It wasn't until they reached the fountain where the rift to Illusionary Haven had torn open that Northern truly grasped the scale of the destruction inflicted upon the trade city of Lithia. What had once been a city of proud, lonesome buildings, erected with handsome craftsmanship, had been reduced to a wasteland, a battlefield of titans, a scar carved into the land by war. Buildings lay in crumbled heaps, reduced to rubble and ruin. Craters pockmarked the ground like impact wounds from fallen stars. The devastation was complete, and the blame lay largely between the battle of Nebulous Lord and the abysmal Belial. The sheer scope of their clash stirred a question in Northern's mind, one that settled strangely at the edge of his thoughts. Are abysmal levels stronger than apex levels? He wasn't sure. Apex had always been defined as the peak of monster hierarchy, the pinnacle of danger. But his encounters with apex beings had felt different, less monstrous, more structured. He had begun to suspect that apex monsters were marked not by raw power alone, but by their ability of order. They were natural leaders born to control chaos, not contribute to it. Wherever they stepped, structure followed. They weren't just powerful. They commanded. It was the reason why Rift Guardians were so often apex-level creatures. But something about the abysmals unsettled him. Apex monsters, as he'd come to understand, had evolved from abysmals, so how did abysmals still feel more terrifying? More chaotic? More evil? Devil and abysmal. These two danger levels seemed like outliers. Ragged anomalies. Unrefined, untamed, unfit for the natural order. Was Apex the world's way of fixing them? Was it nature correcting its own defect? Another question he couldn't answer. Not unless the world itself decided to speak. As they approached the lonesome plaza, Ascendant Zion and Sage Mac appeared at the front, reporting in. Sage Rama leapt down from the roof of the ruined city hall shortly after, landing beside them. He had been helpful, handling rogue behemoths with his younger brother and a handful of drifters. Altogether they had managed to bring one down. Compared to what Northern, his summons and Paragon Rizel had accomplished, their feat felt pitiful. Insignificant even, but still, a sage and a savant taking down a behemoth was no small accomplishment. If there were a hall of fame, it would be worthy of inscription, though no such place existed. Ascendant Zion looked at Northern with wide, gleaming eyes. Sage Rian, you are amazing. I don't even know what to say. You're so strong. His gaze shifted toward the paragon beside Northern, a flicker of worry crossing his features. Burning Storm raised an eyebrow. So, I'm not amazing? Zion froze. A tremble danced in his hands as he frantically shook his head.
No.
Not at all, sir. I just meant that. He stopped, catching himself, then awkwardly tried not to look at Rizel's missing arm. His gaze dipped, avoiding the empty shoulder entirely. The paragon smiled, softly, almost amused, and used the arm he was still holding in his other hand to lightly tap Zion's shoulder. It's fine. It's fine. No need to be so worried about me. Zion went pale again, but forced himself to nod, trying to maintain composure. He looked very sick. What's the situation on ground? Paragon Rizel's voice cut through the air, measured, serious, as he withdrew his hand from Ascendant Zion's shoulder. Still slightly cringing from the cold, lifeless touch, Zion straightened and spoke. We've evacuated everyone. All civilians and merchants have been moved inside the rift. Only the drifters remain now. There were a few issues here and there, but I handled them. You don't need to worry. Rizel gave a short nod. Oh? That's good then. I knew I could count on you. Zion swallowed. A shadow crept across his expression, dulling the edge of his gaze. However, sir, there's still one situation. Burning Storm narrowed his eyes, reading the unease on the Ascendant's face. Speak. It's the healer Braham. He's refusing to go with us drifters to Verilania. He insists he'll only be evacuated with the civilians. Paragon Rizel groaned, rubbing his temple. Oh, dear stars. That butter boy again. Northern scoffed under his breath. I'm not surprised he's being a problem. Rizel turned toward him, his eyes widening slightly. That's right, you mentioned you're from the Dark Continent. Braham is too. Strange, isn't it, that the same land could produce him? A spoiled, whining son of a rotten birth, and you a fine, terrifying child of steel. He squinted thoughtfully. How is that even possible? Weren't you all forged by the same crucible? Northern gave a light shrug. Some people choose to step into the crucible. Others just bask in its warmth and pretend that's the same thing. Rizel stared at him for a few long beats, still caught in the quiet awe that hadn't left since the battle. He'd witnessed just a sliver of what Northern could do, and it haunted him. The ease with which he fought. The monstrous presence that seemed to wrap around him like a cloak. The child from the Dark Continent had grown into something else. He exhaled and looked away. Northern's voice came again. Rough, hoarse, yet laced with dark amusement. Well, if you'll let me, I can deal with him. A grin flickered on his face, crooked and wicked, though he was careful to keep it reined in. Rizel looked at him, weighed the offer, then sighed and shook his head.
No.
We'll deal with him later. Right now, we need a real solution for that thing. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing as he stared upward, mind already shifting into strategy. Northern lifted his gaze as well. There, hanging from the rift like a limp marionette, was the hand. It protruded from the black eye in the sky, unnaturally still, as if the heavens themselves had tried to pull something through and failed halfway. The fingers twitched now and then, sending faint pulses of unease through the air. It was enormous. There was no way the rest of that creature could fit through the rift. It was simply impossible, at least by any known standard of reality. Northern frowned. Everything about this rift is wrong. The way it expanded, the pressure it exuded, the strange dissonance in the air, like the rules of the world had been stretched too far and were beginning to tear. Who could really be behind this? It doesn't feel natural. It feels orchestrated. A stall tactic. Deliberate. His mind sifted through possibilities, trying to put a face to the scheme, but nothing surfaced. No name.
No shadow.
Only a lingering emptiness that gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. Eventually, he exhaled slowly and tore his gaze away from the hand. Well, he muttered, voice low and resolved. The only solution I can think of right now is to cut that rotten hand off and seal the rift. Chapter 883. The Leviathan's Hand, Part 1. Paragon Rizel turned to Northern with a deep frown, disbelief etching the lines of his face. He echoed the words under his breath. Cut it? And seal the rift. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. I can understand cutting it, but sealing the rift? Is that even possible? Northern offered a smug smile. Usually? No, but I'm not usual. I can do things people normally can't. Rizel swept his gaze across the battlefield. At the craters, the broken stone, the still lingering stench of chaos, and sighed again. Fine. I believe you. Of course he did. He'd be a fool not to after everything he'd just witnessed. But how exactly do we pull this off? Can we even cut the hand of a Leviathan? He paused, voice dropping an octave. I've never faced one before. Never even heard of anyone who has. And even if it's just the hand, I don't know how to feel about this. I doubt it's going to be easy. Northern's smile widened, calm and confident. An eerie contrast to the tension clinging to the air. Well, it's certainly not going to be easy. But when has anything ever been? Rizel glanced at him again, and this time he smiled too, nostalgic and resolved. You're right. Nothing has ever come easy. I had to claw my way out of the deepest pits just to stand here today. He cracked his knuckles, lowered his stance, and grinned. So yeah, I'm not stopping now. With that, he launched into the air. The force of his takeoff sent dust and debris scattering in all directions. The ground groaned beneath the weight of the impact. Northern instinctively raised a shield of void force, eyes narrowing slightly. Such a graceless takeoff, he muttered. Then he took flight, fluid and seamless, like a celestial leaf carried by the wind, yet with the ruthless velocity of a missile tearing through sky. He soared upwards until he hovered beside the Paragon, who now floated midair near the massive, pulsing rift. Below them, others gathered. Abyss Tyrant, Nebulous Lord, and more of Northern summons, rising slowly into the sky, their monstrous forms casting long, flickering shadows across the ruins. All of them stared upward, fixated on the rift above. It pulsed like a wound in the sky, its edges rippling with a darkness too deep to name. A cold dread bled from it, creeping into their bones, whispering threats that only their instincts could hear. Northern scanned the group, then raised his voice, loud and clear across the sky. Well, it doesn't look like it's planning to spill anything else out, and getting in seems like the real fight now. He paused, his tone shifting to mock casual. Who wants to go first? He smirked, the grin not quite reaching his eyes. Not that I expect anyone to actually be able to cut the hand of a Leviathan. Sage Rama's voice rang out from the rooftop of the city hall. I am willing to go first. Beside him stood a tall, ocean blue-haired boy with freckles dusting his cheeks. His eyes were bright, lively, and bold, matching the armor he wore. A sleek blend of pale blue and shadowed black. Lithe muscles lined his frame, giving him the appearance of both a dancer and a warrior. He turned toward his brother, voice low and sharp. What the hell do you think you're doing? Rama, Severed Waves, as he was called on the battlefield, grinned. Don't worry, I've got that ancient grade battle axe father gave me on my 30th birthday. I can manipulate the waves around it to amplify the impact. Leviathan or not, At the end of the day it's just a hand. A stuck hand. Limited movement. The younger brother winced, exhaling sharply. All right, brother. Whatever it is you want. But remember what father always says about fame and glory. Fame makes the fool, and glory digs the grave. Yes, yes. I know, Rover. Rama grinned wider, electric anticipation sparking behind his eyes. What are you even worried about? This is an ancient-grade weapon, one that can rip space apart. Do you know how rare those are? Without waiting for a reply, he launched into the air. White sparks swirled around his arms like coiling serpents as he rocketed upward. With a single, powerful leap, he covered a breathtaking distance, soaring from the city hall rooftop straight toward the black rift in the sky, where the Leviathan's arm still hung in unnatural stillness. The hand protruded up to the elbow, strangely human-like in shape, but cloaked in skin the color of the night, drenched in an eerie, unmoving darkness. At the peak of his flight, Rama had summoned a massive war axe, its edge gleaming, humming with ancient essence. As he began his descent, the winds around him seemed to kneel to his will. The air, sound, and unseen currents aligned perfectly, forming a pathway of precision and control. Momentum surged. The force of his fall, the finesse of his manipulation, and the ancient power embedded in the weapon, all converged into one devastating strike. The wind shivered, the sky tensed, silence held its breath. Even Northern's brow furrowed, his usual calm replaced by solemn anticipation. And then, impact. A shriek of metal tore through the dark heavens, a sound so harrowing it crawled down everyone's spine and buried goosebumps beneath their skin. Rama's eyes widened in disbelief as the axe met its target. Everything blade, shaft, wave-forged force shattered. The weapon splintered like fragile glass. Shards of pale light burst into the sky before vanishing, like dying stars. He didn't even have time to react. The waves he'd commanded turned on him, rebelling in a violent backlash. They screamed in chaotic turbulence, tossing him backward like a rag doll. He flew, slammed through the city hall window, crashed through a stone pillar, and finally blasted through one of the interior walls, vanishing into the structure with a dull, heavy thud. Silence followed. The Leviathan's hand hadn't moved, hadn't flinched, hadn't reacted at all. It remained exactly as it had before, protruding from the rift, stagnant and cold, as if it hadn't even felt the attack. Northern's face paled. He stared at the hand for a long moment, then let out a slow breath, curling a corner of his lips into a wry smile. Okay, maybe this is going to be harder than I thought. Chapter 884. Stone Crest. Everything about the attack just now was terrifying. Even with just a glimpse of power, Northern could somewhat comprehend the kind of monstrous force Sage severing waves would one day become. If this was what he was like already, Northern couldn't help but wonder how strong his parents must have been, or his elder brother. There was no doubt they were going to be insanely powerful. The attack moments ago had threatened to tear the very wind apart. Northern felt his heartbeat surge, stronger than usual, and his hand almost moved to clutch his chest in excitement. And despite all of that force, there wasn't even a single scratch. Not a whiff of smoke left behind on the trapped hand. Not even the slightest mark to show that an ancient weapon had just collided with that skin, and shattered instantly. Northern suddenly began to feel a tinge of pity for his illusion hefter. Of course, he wasn't stupid enough to use a legendary item to strike a Leviathan, not when even an ancient weapon had failed. Especially when some of his standalone talent abilities were sharper and more powerful than legendary or ancient items. Take Black Lance, for example. Northern exhaled slowly. A subtle smile still lingered at the corner of his lips as he turned toward the Paragon. Burning Storm scratched his temple with the amputated hand he was holding, instantly making Northern wince. Please? Can you stop doing that? The Paragon glanced at Northern with a slight frown. Stop doing what? Are you going to give me another hand? Northern winced harder. What? Am I selling hands?
No.
Burning Storm rolled his eyes, lazy and unbothered. Then shut up and stop complaining. Now what do we do? Northern frowned and looked away, his gaze returning to the lazy, titanic hand still hovering ahead. Silence lingered between them. Then he glanced down. There was still Ascendant Zion, Sage Mac, and one other man standing on the roof. The third, Northern could easily identify as Roma's brother. He looked just like Sage Rama. All her siblings have blue hair. Why does she have blonde hair? He shoved the question aside almost as quickly as it had come and narrowed his focus on Ascendant Zion. Wait, he's an Ascendant, isn't he? Paragon Rizel followed Northern's gaze to the man below. I mean, he is called Ascendant Zion. It was rhetorical. Northern responded sharply, then flashed downward in a swift blink. He landed softly, looking at Ascendant Zion with one hand rubbing his jaw, scrutinizing. The Ascendant flinched slightly, startled both by Northern's sudden descent and the strange look in his eyes. He instinctively stepped back, gaze uncertain. Profile. Name, Sinai Zion. True name, Stone Crest. Attributes, the 3 jagged peak. Soul rank, ephemeral. Soul core saturation, low. Talent, Titan Hide Bastion. Talent class, A. Talent abilities, Stone Cloak, Earthen Pulse, Mountain Grasp, Obsidian Blood, Pillar of Ruin, Golem's Rebirth. Interesting. Seems similar to Titan's Reckoning in subtle ways. I wouldn't be surprised if they're somehow related. Northern gave a half-shrug and refocused his attention on Ascendant Zion. So, would you like to try? Ascendant Zion looked up at the massive hand hanging from the rift above, his face pale with hesitation. The terror was written all over his expression. I mean, Sage Rama tried, and failed. I don't even have a legendary item in my arsenal. Northern grimaced, eyes narrowing as he regarded him. Come on, speak about yourself with more confidence. You're an Ascendant. Why are you placing yourself beneath others? Ascendant Zion shook his head, a faint, sheepish smile on his lips. You don't understand, Sage Rian. These are people with magnanimous experience in battle. That alone makes up for whatever they're lacking in ranks. Sure, I'm not disputing that. Northern's voice was firm but not unkind. But it doesn't change the fact that you are an Ascendant. If you don't want to try out of fear, that's your decision. I won't push you. He sighed and turned to walk away, disappointment quietly sinking into his posture. But before he could take a full step, wait! Northern paused. Ascendant Zion's voice trembled slightly. He fidgeted before speaking again. But even if I was to try, that thing's too far into the sky, and I can't fly. Northern turned back, a subtle grin spreading across his face. That's simple. He snapped his fingers. Instantly, black tendrils crawled out from his back, slithering along the rooftop like serpents. They climbed over Zion's body, wrapping around him with eerie precision, until they expanded, forming a widespread black wing structure across his back. Everyone behind them froze. A few gasped. Even Burning Storm leaned forward slightly. Rover muttered to himself, eyes wide in disbelief. How can he even do that? Northern smiled and waved his hand. With that simple motion, the large black wings flapped, and carried Ascendant Zion into the air. Zion's eyes widened in awe, wind roaring past his ears as he soared above the rooftops, without a flight ability of his own. The wings carried him effortlessly toward the rift, where they came to a halt beside Paragon Rizel. The Paragon turned to him with a peculiar smile, then casually waved the amputated hand he was still holding. Hi! Welcome on board. Zion paled. Then he looked forward. His gaze landed on the titanic hand hanging in the sky, and he paled even more. His skin drained of color until he looked almost ghostly white. He didn't know where to look anymore. His gaze danced from the hand to the horizon, to the rooftops below, to the faces watching him. Then Northern drifted up beside him, hovering calmly in the air, a small smile playing on his lips. So, what do you think you can pull off against it? Zion lingered in silence, thinking. Wang. Then he slowly nodded. Most of my abilities are defense-based. They don't work well for long-range attacks. However, there's one. I could use it. Northern nodded firmly, his voice carrying unwavering support. Good. Then go for it. Zion smiled, handsome, suddenly confident. Is it okay if you give me some space? Northern arched a brow, then chuckled softly. Oh, of course. Why not? He drifted away, followed by Paragon Rizel and the other summons, giving Zion a wide berth. Once they were clear, Zion inhaled, a deep, mad breath that swelled his chest monstrously wide. He sucked his bottom lip in, making an awkward face that scrunched his features, then exhaled with force. A whirlwind erupted. Brown dust spiraled into the air, weaving chaotically around him. The air thickened, the air vibrating from the pulse of energy rising from his core. Northern's eyes narrowed slightly. Is that the nature of his essence? Dust? No, not quite. As the dust storm intensified, Northern began to see it. This was only the beginning. Prelude. The true essence had evolved beyond that, far beyond what it used to be. The dust coarsened into sand. The sand condensed further, swirling faster, until it began merging with glowing brown lights that flickered like embers in a forge. And then the sand molded, extended, twisted and grew, until a colossal cone of rock emerged from the storm, twice the size of the hand in the rift. It cast a dark, ominous shadow over all of Lithia. The structure was crude, massive, unrefined, but filled with terrifying weight. It didn't float gently. It hurled forward, flung like a mountain being fired from a cannon, its sheer momentum shaking the sky. Tumultuous power roared outward as the stone cone barreled through the sky, aiming straight for the hand. Chapter 885. The Leviathan's Hand, Part 2. Whoa, no kidding. He's fierce. To hurl a mass of stone the size of an entire city. Yeah, an ascendant really was an ascendant. Whether he'd become one an hour ago or 10 years back didn't matter much when that kind of power was involved. Which made Northern a little irritated. Disappointed even. Ascendant Zion was of higher rank and yet still considered himself lesser than Roma's brother? He does look like a nice guy, maybe too nice, because seriously. Northern frowned subtly, folding his arms as he watched the colossal stone cone slam into the Leviathan's hand in a cataclysmic eruption of sound and force. The air screamed. The impact sent tremors spiraling across the sky. Shrapnel exploded outward from the cone, glowing with residual earthen energy, only to dissolve midair into nothing but ash and echoes. A massive shockwave ripped through the clouds, bending the edges of the rift and rattling Lithia below with its aftershock. And when the dust finally cleared, the hand was still there, untouched.
No cracks.
No tremors. Not even any visible shimmer of reaction, like the attack never even happened. Ascendant Zion hovered in stunned silence, the black wings on his back twitching faintly. His confident grin faded, replaced by a grimace of disbelief. He muttered, hollow and low, "Nothing? Not even a tremor." Northern's eyes narrowed, studying the aftermath. Unlike Severing Wave's attack, which had at least been deflected, this one didn't even trigger a visible defense. It had simply disintegrated. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. This is a difficult one. For real. He glanced sideways. Burning Storm was idly poking the severed hand he still carried, testing its texture, pressing into the palm with mild curiosity. Really? Northern muttered. Paragon Rizel shrugged lazily. What? It's the hand of a Leviathan. A Leviathan. Maybe only luminaries can take on that thing. Northern shook his head, lips twisting downward in disbelief. I am so disappointed in you. With a sigh, he looked around, already evaluating the next potential candidates. But before that, he drifted toward Ascendant Zion, who was still hovering in quiet frustration. Your attack was more impactful than that of Severing Waves. And I'm not just saying that to make you feel better. Look over there. He pointed to the hand. Zion followed his finger, squinting toward the colossal limb. See the little finger, Northern said softly. Zion's gaze sharpened, and then his eyes widened. Northern gave a small, satisfied nod. Yes. It wasn't obvious at first glance, but the little finger among the creature's 5 elongated digits was slightly out of proportion, shifted, off angle in a way that broke its otherwise perfect symmetry. A subtle detail but meaningful. It was either strained by the attack, or had reacted to it. Either way, something had affected it. Northern suspected the creature had specifically used that little finger to counter or incinerate the incoming stone. Whereas when Sage Rama attacked, the creature hadn't even acknowledged it. All that happened was a deflection of force. That alone said enough. He tapped Ascendant Zion lightly on the shoulder before the black wings guided him gently down to the roof. Northern's eyes shifted back to the floating hand. His gaze flicked to his summons, considering who might step forward next. Abyss Tyrant came to mind. His ability rewrites concepts. That has to be useful here. But then Northern frowned slightly. No. He probably needs to be on land for that to work. Abyss Tyrant's ability functioned like a pseudo-domain. It required grounding, literally. The activation ritual involved stabbing his staff into the earth and spreading the influence outward from there. And then there was Nebulous Lord. Man, I don't want to disturb Nebulous Lord right now. He just finished one hell of a battle. Northern exhaled and turned his gaze back to the hand. Then he glanced sideways at Paragon Rizel. Without a word, he floated toward Burning Storm. Hey! He called out, voice level. That essence manifestation thing you Paragons have going on. This might be the time to bring it to life and cut that damn hand so I can close the rift. Paragon Rizel said nothing. He stood there, staring at the hand. Silent. Seconds passed. Then he finally spoke. No. Northern blinked. He wasn't sure he'd heard that correctly. He leaned forward slightly, squinting at the older man. What do you mean by no? The Paragon didn't even bother turning all the way around. Just tilted his head a little in Northern's direction. Exactly what I said, Ral. No. I've been thinking about the timing of this rift, how impeccable it is, and I can't help but feel like it's here either to kill me, or force me into using essence manifestation. Northern's frown deepened, but he followed the Paragon's line of reasoning. He'd had similar suspicions himself. He gave a subtle nod. You make sense. But why is using essence manifestation such a big problem? It sounds strangely specific. Rizel's expression darkened. His voice lost all its usual teasing edge. Because a Paragon can't use essence manifestation twice in a row. Northern tilted his head back slightly. Wait, how? Don't Paragons have massive reserves of soul essence? Isn't that the whole reason evolution is so hard? Your reserve should be able to handle that. Rizel nodded, lips tightening. Exactly. Which should tell you how broken essence manifestation really is. It drains you completely. If I use it here, it'll exhaust every drop of soul essence I have left. And that's not something I can afford right now. His voice dropped lower. I need to fly to Fugal. My wife's there, so is my unborn child. And as things stand, I'm already fighting with a missing hand. My reserves are at half what they should be. And I have to go up against someone like Dante. Northern's expression turned serious. Paragon Rizel turned and looked him directly in the eyes. Or, he said slowly, do you want to do it on my behalf? Northern's lips curled into a frown. No, not at all. Rizel nodded once, clearly expecting that answer. Thought so. He tapped his shoulder with the amputated hand, lightly, mockingly, and then looked at Northern again with a sharper glint in his eyes. You're going to have to deal with this one on your own, Ral. It's docile, not an attacking monster. All you need to do is cut the damn thing. Sever the hand, close the rift. He paused, then added with deliberate emphasis. You should be able to do that much, right? Menti. Chapter 886. The Leviathan's Hand, Part 3. Northern stood suspended in the night sky, his gaze fixed on the colossal hand with a tense, serious expression. Paragon Rizel had made a lot of sense, and Northern agreed. The Paragon had to fight Dante either way, and he had no desire to be part of the battle. He exhaled softly, inhaled, then exhaled again. Now, what exactly can make this hand crumble? A cold, subtle blue light flickered to life in Northern's eyes. Let's go. Gently first. He raised one hand, narrowing his gaze at the massive limb as if locking onto a target, then shut his eyes. Every one of his talent or attribute abilities carried a spectrum of damage, determined by how much void essence he chose to channel into them. Northern had only wielded soul essence briefly, before his contact with the void. So, his understanding of the soul remained limited. But the void, he knew that far too well. It was an amplifying force like no other. Essence, in essence, was meant to be sustenance. Powered talent activation. Of course, deeper studies revealed it wasn't just that. It was a fundamental energy that composed the world and its entities. A form of life in and of itself. But void essence defied that understanding. Void essence was lifelessness, embodied. And yet, it existed. By existing, it became its own twisted form of life. This contradiction left Northern baffled, still piecing the puzzle together. But he had come to understand one thing. This life of lifelessness imbued his talents with a stark, devouring nothingness. It hollowed out his abilities, consumed their vitality, and in doing so granted them the void's livelihood. With their essence consumed, they became unnaturally amplified. To make things even more complicated, his system had updated. Now, he could combine talent abilities at will. He could take an ability from Frostheart and fuse it with an ability from Whispering Gale. Or he could extract an attribute from Chaos Flame and merge it with an ability from Phantom Strike. The possibilities were endless, so endless, in fact, that deciding on just one felt like a battle on its own. So, Northern chose a simpler path. Test everything. Test his mind. Test his body. Test every ability, every combination, until the hand shattered. Until he found the one that could break the Leviathan's hand. Northern breathed gently, his eyes turning deathly cold as he lowered his raised hand and muttered, "Black Lance." A terrifying warping sound engulfed the sky, and an oppressive weight crashed down on the atmosphere. Everyone felt it. Their knees buckled as they collapsed beneath the unseen force. Even the darkness of night trembled, disturbed by the sheer, unreasonable magnitude of tension that bent the very air. Then something blotted out the night. No one, absolutely no one, could have imagined the sky itself would be split by a deeper darkness, one that erased existence. It was as if a vast portion of the night's blanket had been torn open, leaving behind a gaping void. It wasn't light. It wasn't shadow. It was absence. Pure, stark emptiness. The gray that lingers between the edge of dawn and the retreat of night. The black lance tore through the stars in a jagged arc. And for a fleeting moment, the heavens didn't shimmer. They shuddered, recoiling as the streak bled shadows across the firmament. It wasn't a beam. It was a void made visible, a gash in reality where light itself went to die. The dark clouds didn't part. They vanished, evaporated in utter silence, consumed along the lance's path. Everything halted, even the air. Movement ceased like marionettes with severed strings. Time faltered, stalling as if the sky itself struggled to comprehend what had just been released. Below, the earth didn't quake. It listened, holding its breath. For what comes next when the sky bleeds black? Chaos. And it crashed into the Leviathan's hand. For a single moment the world turned pitch black. Sight vanished. Sound followed. Nothing could be seen or heard. Then a tremble. Not in the ground, but in reality itself. The air vibrated, like the threads of existence were being tugged toward rupture. Those standing on the rooftop felt it. An alien vibration seeping into their blood, crawling through their bones, cloaking them in unexplainable dread. Then, slowly, subtly, the world reassembled. The air regained its balance. The gray void faded, and the rift among the stars began to mend. The night sky stitched itself back together, as if nothing had ever happened. But the expressions left behind were far from composed. Gasps hung in the air, mouths frozen mid-breath, eyes wide and vacant. Rover, Roma's elder brother, stood pale, his gaze narrowed in disbelief, his face dripping with sweat, shoulders subtly trembling. He turned to Sage Mac, whose face remained blank with a dazed expression. Then to Ascendant Zion, the gentle, composed man now caught in the fever of pale, uncomprehending shock. Every drifter who had witnessed it stood frozen, emotionless, wordless. Their minds had yet to decide how to respond. Even Paragon Rizel was frowning, his expression wary, baffled, pale and mesmerized. At this point, his mentee could no longer surprise him. But a question had begun to burn. What the hell did he have to go through to gain a power like that? What is his talent? What's his true name? What does he know that we don't? The Paragon's mind screamed silently beneath a storm of unanswered questions. But his face betrayed only a calm frown. Northern, meanwhile, was unimpressed. He stood with a cold frown of disdain, eyes still locked on the hand. Northern's eyes flickered with anger. The light in them was dangerous, chilling. The hand, the damn Leviathan hand. In all his history of wielding Black Lance, this was the most void essence he had ever poured into a single strike. He had emptied an entire clone's worth of gathered void essence just to execute that attack. Which meant, if not for the clones stationed within the limitless void, continuously serving as conduits to channel essence into him, he would have been completely drained, left essenceless and vulnerable. And yet, the damn Leviathan's hand survived it. Northern gritted his teeth. Now I'm mad. Chapter 887, Chaos Flame. Northern was insanely angry. The Leviathan's hand still hung from the rift, fingers slightly curled. His position had shifted. Black smoke seeped from its skin, and where it lifted, black flames crawled along its surface, healing the exposed whitish muscles beneath the ravaged flesh. Northern stared, disgusted and deeply irritated. A clone had just exhausted all the void essence gathered from the Void Palace, and there was nothing to show for it. He closed his eyes again, diving deeper into the sanctum of his mind. Then he began. He remembered it clearly. During the raid with Paragon Dante, he had somehow unraveled the true form of Chaos Flame, transforming it from black to white. The effect had been so catastrophic, it completely erased a creature's existence. How did he do it? Chaos Flame had always been a fragmented ability, broken into Black Flames and Black Lance. It often felt closer to the void than to chaos itself, until the first time Northern merged the two. That was when it became clear. Black Flame and Black Lance were never meant to be used separately. They were two halves of a whole puzzle, only complete when put together. Chaos Flame wasn't either of them. It was both of them, together. Earlier he had used only a part Black Lance. Its damage was conceptual, could cleave through the impossible. And yet it hadn't worked. The hand had remained. Northern was bothered, but not consumed by doubt. Black Lance was a conceptual attack. It dealt physical devastation and instantaneous death. But if something existed that could alter its own essence, its nature vast and adaptive, it could theoretically block or even survive Black Lance. The abysmal Belial had shown him that much, so he wasn't entirely surprised. But still, for the Leviathan's hand to remain intact, and worse, to heal, was maddening. The flames healing it bore a striking resemblance to the former state of Black Flame. Black Flame now was a bluish-black, a beautiful and dangerous flame. Black Lance, by contrast, retained its color, an inky darkness that devoured light. And yet, when combined, they produced white flames. It was strange, illogical, and yet real. On one hand, Black Flame ignited, burning and dancing wildly in his palm, surging with chaotic intensity. In the other, Northern held Black Lance, humming with suppressed violence. He brought the two together. As they moved toward one another, ripples formed, one to his left, one to his right, as if the very air had become water, disturbed by the drop of invisible stones. The ripples expanded, converged, and in that instant, impact, a violent force exploded outward, displacing the wind in a burst of raw energy. Northern's clothes flared, whipping in the turbulent air as the darkness around him lit up, bathed in white fire. The flames in his hand burned viciously, as if trying to escape his grip, straining against containment. They roared, desperate and alive, like wild animals clawing at the cage. Northern gritted his teeth, a bead of sweat rolling down his brow as he fought to contain it. The flames pulsed in his palm, fierce and unforgiving in their heat. Northern watched with a tense frown as his skin burned away, only to regenerate chaotically, then burn again the next second. It was a merciless loop that wouldn't end so long as the chaos flame remained in his grasp. But Northern didn't relent. He doubled down, pressing the full weight of his vast soul and body against the white flame. It was, by all accounts, a foolish act. Chaos flame was a fragment of chaos itself, second only to the void in sheer destructive force, though even that was debatable. Trying to tame it was madness. But taming it wasn't his goal. He wasn't trying to dominate it, he was instructing it. Chaos, void, and he had struck an agreement. And the imprint of that pact was carved into his very body and soul. Pressing them onto the stubborn flame was his way of reminding chaos. Remember, I'm supposed to be in control here. And just as Northern predicted, it worked. The flame still danced wildly in his hand, dangerous and alive, but the searing pain ceased. It no longer burned him, though its ferocity remained as vicious as ever. Now Northern felt it, control. Bit by bit, he extended the flame outward. He pulled his hands apart. The chaos flame stretched, elongating into a brilliant, burning arrow. He held it over his shoulder, gaze fixed coldly on the Leviathan's hand. Then his chaos eyes opened. Instantly, the flame surged, its glow intensifying, responding to the activation of chaos eyes. Northern felt his grip tighten on the strange embodiment of finality. It was his now, more than ever. All his chaos eyes converged, narrowing on the grotesque limb hanging from the rift. He frowned. Azure sparks flared in his eyes. In that moment, the pressure around the Leviathan's hand collapsed. What had been sagging, dragged down by gravity, now floated unnaturally. Its weight erased. The air around it began to behave erratically. The wind itself fled, swirling and recoiling, as if repulsed by the anomaly. A strange zone had formed, an invisible gravity-less field enveloping the hand completely. But Northern wasn't done. That was only the first step. He moved to the next. Echo! The arrow in his grip hummed, vibrating with primal satisfaction. Northern took one last glance at the Leviathan's hand, then slowly began to fly backward. You have changed your name. He infused himself with colossal force, his frame bulging with overwhelming, titanic power. He clenched the arrow tighter, as if choking the very soul from the chaos flame. Then, with a mighty surge of power, he whipped his arm backward, and hurled the arrow with everything his titanic body could offer. A seismic sound erupted. It tore through the air, ripping apart the sound barrier, unleashing a deafening shockwave that pulsed outward with unstoppable force. The arrow screamed through the air like a wrathful comet, dragging a trail of blinding white fire behind it. Space trembled in its wake. Even the stars recoiled, twitching ever so slightly, as if reality itself was instinctively flinching. The wind didn't howl. It fled. Silence followed the arrow's path, a vacuum of sound where nothing dared to exist. Then it struck. The chaos flame arrow collided with the Leviathan's hand, and for a moment, there was nothing.
No explosión.
No sound. No light. Just silence. Then came the collapse. Chapter 888. Unmade a Leviathan's hand. Reality folded in on itself at the point of impact. It wasn't destruction, it was erasure. The arrow didn't burn the hand. It unmade it. With a flashless burst, the limb began to dissolve. Not disintegrate, not shatter. Just cease to exist. The black flames crawling across the Leviathan's flesh screamed in rejection. They flared, wildly and desperately, fighting back against the purging force. But the resistance was meaningless. They were devoured, swallowed whole by the white flame, without mercy, without recognition. And then came the scream. It wasn't heard, it was felt. A pressure slammed into every soul present, as if the sky itself shrieked in protest. The landscape didn't shake, they recoiled. Clouds twisted into shapes they weren't meant to take. The weight of the soundless howl cracked the atmosphere like fragile glass. Northern's chaos eyes narrowed. He stood still, silent, watching the hand's reality unravel. And from his body, black tendrils erupted, hundreds of them, like spears of entropy. They surged toward the heavens, veiling the rift's entry point in a web of living darkness. Now that the hand was gone, the Leviathan would no longer be anchored. And once freed, it might hurl a stronger force through the rift, one capable of breaking their last line of defense. No one here was ready to face a Leviathan. And it wasn't about him. If he'd been alone, without humans to protect, without time pressing its blade against their throats, he would have welcomed it. He would have looked it in the eye and grinned. After all, it would be the perfect test. A confrontation worthy of his evolution. But not here. Not in Lithia. Not where a single breath from the beast could end thousands of lives. Already, the city looked like a graveyard carved by gods. Half of Lithia stood in ruins, buried beneath ash and broken hopes. If he clashed with the Leviathan now, even the sea would not survive it. Could he kill a Leviathan at his rank? Absolutely. He possessed a power that could unmake existence itself. An attribute that could disrupt the balance of the world. And yet, for the briefest moment, Northern froze. A thought surfaced. Uninvited. Inevitable. Chaos flame. Seems like a rip-off from it. I should investigate that later. He forced his gaze back to the sky. The void tendrils covering the rift were bulging, thick, dark veins pulsing as something massive on the other side tried to claw through. The pressure made the rift tremble, its boundaries warping with strain. Yet the tendrils held, refusing to yield. They pulsed, contracted, then expanded, struggling to hold their form under the Leviathan's power. Some widened, threatening to tear apart. Others shook, tense as drawn wire. Then Northern extended more tendrils, doubling, tripling their number. He unfurled his void wings and latched them onto the rift's edges, anchoring the frame in place and reinforcing the tendrils from outside the breach. The contraction resumed. A silent tug-of-war began between reality and monstrosity. And slowly the Leviathan began to lose. The tendrils squeezed tighter, folding space around the rift. But there was more to them than just void. Woven into each tendril, like veins beneath the surface, was soul thread, fine, spectral filaments laced with precision. They slithered through the rift's borders, threading through the seams of fractured reality. Stitching, binding, sewing the edges of the tear as the tendrils pulled, clenched, and closed the rift. Not sealed. Not yet. But the gate was narrowing. And with every second, the Leviathan's grip on this world weakened. Northern poured more force, more essence into the soul threads, driving even more void tendrils forward until he felt his body reach the edge of elasticity. They weren't just constructs. Void tendrils were him, extensions of his soul, woven in the same breath and expressed through his body. He groaned through clenched teeth, pain spiking like lightning as his limbs trembled. At this point, all he could do was endure, wait for the soul threads to finish what they'd started. And the waiting, it was excruciating. Each second felt like a lifetime stretched thin, like skin pulled over shattered bone. His body expanded, or at least felt like it did, stretching, warping, bloating with unbearable pressure. Worse still, the Leviathan hadn't stopped fighting. Its will pressed against the tendrils, gnashing down on them with force titanic enough to shake the sky. And that resistance didn't just strain his flesh, it ravaged his soul. The tendrils may have emerged from his body, but their roots were buried deep in the evolving chaos of his soul. Every tug, every clash, tore a little more of him apart. At some point, Northern began to tremble. And then, the rift sealed shut. He watched in silence as the last thread stitched the final edge. And only then did he release the tendrils. They recoiled like rubber bands snapped from the heavens, flapping once before collapsing inward and vanishing into him. A heartbeat later, Northern lost his balance. His flight cut out. His limbs failed him. Chaos eyes flickered once and died, leaving him with nothing but a haze, a blur of falling color. And he plummeted. But before the wind could howl, she was already there. Jessie. A blur of motion too fast for eyes to track. She caught him mid-air, arms locked around his body, her descent like a feather's fall. She landed soundlessly, kneeling with grace carved from reverence, laying his head gently across her lap. Around her the air shifted. Every one of Northern's summons stood in a silent circle, present, alert, and untouchable. No one had seen them move. No one had tracked their arrival. But they were there, and the atmosphere turned volatile. Byron dropped to one knee beside his fallen master. The Sword King lowered his head and listened, close, as Northern mumbled in a voice frayed by exhaustion. I can only trust you to lead things from here. It wasn't permanent. Northern had not fallen, merely overdrawn. Pushing the void tendrils to their limit was no different from pushing his own body beyond its brink. Even chaos couldn't regenerate damage like this instantly. And Void made it worse. But that was fine. He just needed a nap. A long, deep one. He had unmade the hand of a Leviathan, and sealed a Tier 8 rift. That was enough for one day. Byron stood slowly. His eyes swept across the gathered summons, all watching in solemn silence. Then, from within his cloak, he drew a blade. This, he said, is a special sword bestowed upon me by the Master himself. Its sole purpose is to open the gateway to the limitless void, should the need arise. He raised the blade, letting its faint aura flicker to life. By right of this sword, Byron continued, I am the second in command. Revunt's brows twitched. His face darkened. You lying, cheating scum, he spat. That's only dark mortal. But Byron cut him off with a smirk and a flash of condescension in his glowing blue eyes. He said smoothly, that was given to me by the Master, which, by law and legacy, makes me second in command. He stepped forward. I shall open the gateway to the limitless void, so the Master may rest within. He stared hard at Revunt, eyes locking like drawn swords. Incomplete tyrant. You'll take Shard Creeper, Light of Featherstone, and Abyss Tyrant. Head with the drifters to Verilania. He turned, planting the sword into the ground beside him. The rest of us will escort the Master to the other place. Revunt glared at him, and Byron. He only lifted his chin a little more, his grin deepening, that blue light in his gaze dripping with scorn. His voice sounded like a blade dipped in mockery. Master's command. Got a problem with that incomplete tyrant. Chapter 889. Forward. Byron watched in silence as the void summons disappeared into the limitless void, carrying Northern into the dark sanctuary beyond. Only when the last flicker of their presence vanished did he turn, his garb fluttering with a slow finality as he approached the humans gathered on the roof. He stopped before them, silent, still, and swept his gaze across the crowd. A cold, furtive glance. But under those heavy, glacial blue eyes, every one of them stiffened, gulped, swallowed hard. No one dared to speak. Then Byron's gaze shifted to Paragon Rizel. It's a good thing I was there while the planning was going on, he said, voice flat, devoid of warmth. We'll leave for, what's that place again? Rizel replied. Fugal. Yes, Fugal. A brief pause. Then Byron continued without looking at anyone else. How many of us are flying all the way there? Paragon Rizel glanced around, then offered a shrug with a dry chuckle. As far as I know, only I can fly here. Well, aside from you apparently. Byron responded with a nonchalant nod. It's tricky, but yes, I can. He paused again. This time his gaze dropped, honing in on Rizel's severed arm. What are you going to do about your hand? Rizel looked down at the limp limb he held in his other arm. He shrugged, attempting casualness but unable to mask the twinge of pain. I don't know yet. Maybe later. I'll meet the healer. There was a long silence. Then Byron said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Bring it. Rizel blinked, unsure he'd heard correctly. My hand. Yes. The Sword King's tone allowed no room for argument. Rizel hesitated. But after a second, he raised the severed hand slightly and stepped forward, offering it to Byron. What harm could come from following his strange command? Byron took the hand with one arm, and with the other he extended 2 fingers. Blue light gathered at the tips. With slow, precise movements, he carved glowing runes across the palm and wrist, each stroke delicate yet etched with purpose. He handed it back. Attach it. Rizel stared at the glowing hand, confused. But something, perhaps instinct or simply exhaustion, made him comply. He pressed the hand to his severed shoulder, unsure what to expect. The moment flesh touched flesh, the runes lit up, coursing along the break like a rushing stream. Blue light surged across the seam, searing the edges back together. The hand merged into his arm, muscle and skin reknitting as the glow faded. Sparks erupted briefly, birthing new armor that covered the severed hand. Rizel stood motionless. Then, slowly, he flexed his fingers, opened and closed his hand. Felt real. Whole. He stared at Byron, mouth slightly ajar, as disbelief settled in. What did you do? Byron answered, still not looking at him. Veil of remembrance. I can inscribe upon a thing to remember its true essence. It's how I'm able to fly. So it's one of your abilities? Byron nodded. He turned again, staring out toward the sky, his face unreadable. The cold light in his eyes mirrored the stillness of winter, pale and distant. When are we leaving? Paragon Rizel flexed his fingers again. Open, close, close. The sensation was still surreal. The hand felt real. He glanced at the sky. It had changed. The radiant daystar was rising on the horizon where the sea kissed the sky. Its amber light spilled upward, casting a fiery hue across the clouds like the silhouette of a distant flame smoldering at the edge of the world. We should move now. The sooner, the better. Byron turned his eyes to Jesai and Linus, the only 2, aside from the summons following Ascendant Zion and the drifters to Variolania, who hadn't entered the limitless void. He spoke without a hint of sentiment. Since it's the Master's wish that both of you live more like actual humans, you'll travel with them to Variolania. You can rendezvous with the Master's clone there. Linus gave a silent nod. Jesai opened her mouth to object, then stopped. Her lips froze on the edge of protest, but the words never left her. She lowered her eyes, then bowed slightly, her voice quieter than usual, but firm. Please, take care of Master. Without another word, she stepped back beside Linus. Byron turned back to Rizel, his eyes sharp and wordless, but clear in their meaning. It was time. Paragon Rizel crouched down, planted both hands on the rooftop, and grinned like a man reborn. Feels good to have 2 hands again. He launched off the ground. The force split the roof beneath him, webbed cracks spidering outward as shattered slates scattered into the air. But Byron didn't jump. He rose, and with him came something unexpected. A radiant white light engulfed him as he ascended, brilliant, blinding. The light bled into shape, distorting his form until only a silhouette remained. A bird. No, something more. As the light dimmed, great white wings unfurled, glimmering with the purity of untouched snow. He flapped once, and the wind cracked. He took flight. Jesai blinked, momentarily stunned. Did you know he could turn into a big bird? Linus frowned, clicking his tongue. He is the most mysterious person. No one knows anything about him, except that he is good with a sword. They turned to Ascendant Zion, who stood watching the sky, eyes distant. He exhaled slowly, voice calm but certain. All right, let's be on our way too. Before them, the massive rift to the illusionary haven, the one that had loomed in front of the city hall, slowly zipped shut. The wound in space folded in on itself and vanished like it had never been there. High above, Paragon Rizel was stunned to find a massive white bird flying beside him. Its feathers were pristine, as though carved from snow. Its talons looked sharp enough to tear through stone, its beak curved and predatory, and its eyes, cold and blue, pierced the air with silent authority. "A bird," Rizel muttered. "I definitely wasn't expecting that one." He grinned, then burst forward with a booming shockwave, racing ahead in a torrent of force and wind. Chapter 890. To be weak is to be human. Northern opened his eyes in the body of his clone. His mind foggy, breath shallow. A slow dizziness spun behind his eyes as he propped himself up, leaning against the bed frame resting on the wall. He sat there for a few seconds, letting his body catch up with his mind. Then he looked down, eyes narrowing in silent scrutiny. So it really was possible. Right before his real body succumbed to the strain, on the brink of blacking out, Northern had acted on a wild idea. Switching bodies. It was a gamble, but it worked. Resting might have been tempting. He hadn't tasted solitude in days, hadn't even paused to let himself breathe. But rest wasn't a luxury he could afford. Not today. Dawn was breaking. The final day of the Milwa Festival had arrived. And ahead of him, 3 distinct team battles. That was, of course, assuming he won each one. But to Northern, that wasn't even a question. He exhaled deeply and stood up, straightening his posture as he yawned. Despite being in a clone's body, the aftermath of stretching his void tendrils to their elasticity limit still clung to his form like invisible chains. The exhaustion was bone deep. He flexed his fingers, feeling that residual tension. A low concern threaded his thoughts. Would the clone still be able to draw out as much power? He shook his head. That worry wasn't for now. No time to doubt. With slow, deliberate steps, he entered the bathroom, turned the shower on, and lowered his head into the stream. The cold water struck his scalp and trickled down, numbing his senses. He stood motionless beneath the spray. It wasn't cleansing, it was grounding. A few long minutes passed before he reached for the soap and scrub, cleaning his body with mechanical efficiency. Once done, he stepped out, dried off, and threw on a plain tracksuit. Simple. Functional. Just as he opened the door to leave his room, a figure jerked backward, startled. Northern's brow furrowed. "What are you doing?" he asked sharply. Aster stood there, sheepish and awkward. His eyes, downturned, almost apologetic, held a subtle smile. "We haven't talked much these days," he said, voice soft. "I was checking up on you." Northern grimaced at the words. Aster immediately stepped back, palms raised in defense. "I'm sorry if I pissed you off. I was just—" "It's not you," Northern muttered, cutting him off. He didn't look at him, just turned away. "The day's long. Get proper rest." Without another word, Northern walked down the hallway, his steps slow but steady. The corridor was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the walls as if echoing his thoughts. A deep frown marked his face. "Crap, I'm more affected than I thought." The truth hit him like a dull blade. Aster had been at his door all along, and Northern hadn't noticed. His spatial awareness was usually immaculate, never absent without his consent. There were times when he deliberately withdrew it for silence, for meditation, but never had it faded without his knowledge. This was different. This was dangerous. He could only draw one conclusion. His body, strained to the limit, was beginning to fracture in more ways than he realized. Spatial awareness was a function of the body and mind working in harmony. If one suffered, the other followed. And right now, his body felt like an overstretched rubber band, thin, worn, and ready to snap. This is bad. Very bad. The Milwa Festival's final battles were meant to be a showcase. His chance to dominate, to solidify fear and awe. And he was entering them weakened. He stepped outside the mansion into the freezing breath of early morning. The air wrapped around him like a ghost, and twilight cast a pale hue across the corner of his face. His glare was cold, ghastly, A slow grin tugged at the corner of his lips. He whispered to himself with a low voice. Well, it wouldn't be such a bad thing now, would it? Weakened or not, this was the perfect opportunity. If these students, these so-called elites, were truly strong, this would show it. Let them face him like this. Let them have the advantage of vigor. So he'd be able to gauge them and break them. Even in a broken shell, he remained Northern, the one who turned storms into silence, who bled with control, who laughed in the eye of collapse. And he wasn't done. Not yet. Northern's pace picked up. He began to jog, silent steps echoing faintly along the estate's private roads. His movements were clean, measured, gliding over the sidewalk as he weaved past mansion after mansion, never entering, just cutting through their front yards like a passing breeze. Eventually he slowed, then stopped. A small park greeted him. Secluded, quiet, and untouched. He sat on a bench nestled beneath two towering trees. In warmer seasons, their wide-reaching branches would cast dappled light, offering calm shade to anyone seeking solace. But now, in the grip of winter, those branches were bare, stripped and heavy with snow. The cold that lingered beneath them was sharp. It sank deep, made Northern shiver uncontrollably. That wasn't normal. He had endured blistering volcanoes and heat of fiercest forge, trudged through frozen hellscapes. Neither heat nor cold had ever shaken him. His body, honed and hardened by void and chaos, had remained indifferent. But now, he could feel it. Every breath stung. The chill bit through him like teeth. So this is what weakness feels like. It dragged his thoughts back to the countryside of his childhood. Nights spent wrapped in four thick blankets, shivering despite them. His mother's worried voice. The rickety walls that let the cold in like whispers. He hadn't remembered that in years. Since becoming a drifter, sensations like this had faded into irrelevance. Cold and heat were numbers in a report, nothing more. But not today. His body was frayed, broken, from cutting off the hand of a leviathan. A task that even now echoed through his bones like a warning bell. Yet somehow he was smiling. He looked up at the pale, biting sun. Its light was harsh, its warmth absent, but it filled the sky all the same. It's good to feel human again, I guess. His voice was quiet, nearly lost in the wind. Then he sensed it, another presence. A girl walking toward him. Her white hair flowed with the breeze, strands lifted like silk threads in the air. She was small in stature, but her presence weighed heavily on the space around her. Northern instinctively wanted to stand, to leave before conversation could begin. But then he paused. Why? So he stayed. He leaned back on the bench, his head tilted toward the sky, letting the moment stretch. She reached the shade. He shifted slightly, just enough to glance at her. Can I sit? She asked, voice clear against the hush. Northern met her eyes, then nodded. Of course, he said. Chapter 891. Princess from the Northern Continent. Northern and the council president sat in complete silence, neither speaking for nearly 20 minutes. Northern had closed his eyes, letting the cold wind brush against his skin as he resonated with the quiet rhythm of the park. The girl sat beside him with her legs crossed, posture composed, as if waiting for something unspoken to settle. Then he felt a soft poke against his side. Northern opened his eyes and turned his gaze toward her. She was holding out a stainless steel bottle. A water bottle? He asked, brows faintly furrowed in confusion. It's an item that keeps things warm, she replied calmly. There's tea inside. I thought it might help with the cold. Her voice was hoarse, yet laced with a strange, melodious beauty. The sound stood at odds with her short stature, at least based on Northern's assumptions about what someone so small should sound like. He looked at her outstretched hand, unmoving for a moment. It also boosts stamina, she added quietly. It's a really good thing. My mom taught me how to make it. Northern blinked. He hadn't seen her speak this much before. Not once. And judging by the soft tension in her hands, he could tell. It had taken her the full 20 minutes to muster the courage to say anything at all. He exhaled softly and took the bottle from her. "Thank you." Unscrewing the top, he poured the tea into the lid and raised it to his lips. The taste was mildly bitter, just enough to catch his tongue, but it left a sweet aftertaste that lingered warmly in his mouth. It flowed smoothly down his throat, gently warming the tightness in his chest. He let out a low hum of satisfaction. "Arf! That's a good one." The council president smiled faintly, proud. "I know, right? It works." Northern gave her a genuine smile in return, a rare expression that softened the pale edges of his face. "It does. What herb is it made from?" She hesitated, gaze drifting to the side. "I'm not sure you'd know it." Northern met her eyes, still smiling. "Try me. You'd be surprised." She drew a long, cautious glance over him, clearly doubtful. Then, with a short breath, she answered, "Autumn's fall." Northern's smile deepened. "Phygoa ciliaris." Her eyes widened slightly. "Phygoa ciliaris is an uncommon, tiny plant." Northern continued, "Found only in frozen lands. It blooms in late autumn, which is why it earned the name Autumn's Fall. Its leaves are wide and paired, usually green with white edges. It produces small flowers in shades of light brown, bronze, dark yellow, or dark bronze." He paused, letting the description settle. "They grow in tight clusters and are difficult to cultivate or control. Their properties aren't well documented, but they smell incredible." Then his smile dimmed just slightly, turning thoughtful. "But I only know Phygoa ciliaris from the books. It's extremely rare in the Central Plains. There's just not enough frozen terrain. By the time autumn comes, winter's edge has already faded. That's why it's mostly found in the northern continent." He looked down at the tea, then back at her. "And considering most merchants haven't been able to establish consistent trade with the northern continent, this herb is practically unheard of here." He stared at her intently and spoke slowly. "So, I'm rather curious. How did you get this?" The student council president blinked, dumbstruck. In a world where people were obsessed with slaying monsters, honing their talents, and chasing the echoes of their true names, who would have thought someone like Northern, one of the strongest among them, would care so much about plants? She was still trying to wrap her mind around the image when she realized he was waiting. "Are you going to answer?" "Huh." I said, "How did you get such a rare herb?"
I'm curious.
"Oh," she gasped, suddenly remembering how to form words. "Garden. My mother has a garden in the yard of our palace. It's grown there. She cultivates lots of it." Northern's expression shifted. His eyes narrowed, and he leaned in slightly, frowning. "Your house has frozen land?" She looked down and smiled, almost sheepishly. "Well, it's always frozen there." Northern's mind raced, trying to piece it together. Her words, the herb, the conditions. There was only one possibility. There's only one place that could possibly have frozen land year-round. But that's not possible. His head tilted slightly as he tried to rationalize it. "You can't be from the northern continent, right?" The council president nodded. "I am the last princess of the kingdom of Narthro. In the northern continent." Northern froze, mouth open. No thoughts, just, "What?" He blinked, then blinked again. Not only was she from the northern continent, she was royalty? He lurched forward and instinctively grabbed her shoulders, lightning shooting up his spine from the sheer excitement. "Oh my stars! What's the northern continent like? How many kingdoms are there? How do people even survive there? Is it true the sun freezes over for months and you live through endless days? Or nights?" He was a torrent of questions now, wide-eyed and breathless. As a child, Northern had heard tales of the northern continent. Harsh, beautiful, untamed. It had always felt like myth. An Arctic land where time broke down, where monsters were born in blizzards, and where the sun was swallowed whole by the season. He thought they were stories meant to fill taverns and earn a few coins. But now he was sitting beside a girl who lived there. The council president chuckled softly, her smile genuine as Northern's grip still lingered on her shoulders. Only then did he realize it, and immediately withdrew, clearing his throat. Ahem. Sorry. I got a little carried away. She gave a light shrug. It's fine. I'd love to tell you more about it. But we don't have the time. The contest resumes soon. Northern exhaled and nodded. You're right. He stood, brushing off his pants, then looked down at her and passed her the stainless bottle. She collected it, remaining seated, legs still crossed elegantly, her presence as quiet as snowfall. You'll tell me later then? She nodded. After the contest. A small smile tugged at his lips. Okay. He turned to go, took a few steps, then paused. Scratching his cheek, he glanced back, slightly embarrassed. I don't think I ever got your name. She blinked, surprised by the question. Then her lips curved into a smile, and a soft flush crept into her cheeks. My name is Nasira. Nasira Narthro. Northern raised a brow and smirked. All right then, I'll just call you Nissa. You can call me Rian. She blushed again. Okay, Rian. He gave her a brief wave as he walked off. See you at the tournament, Nissa. And with that, he turned a corner, his silhouette vanishing beyond the path. Nissa sat there a moment longer, her eyes still tracing the space he had occupied, until finally, she smiled again. Chapter 892, Old Friends. Northern didn't wear the non-combative school uniform this time. All he had on was the same tracksuit from earlier. He hadn't even bothered to return to his room. Instead, he settled into the dining hall without hesitation. Naturally, he had to endure the stares again. Several students couldn't take their eyes off him, whispering and glancing his way. The servers, however, were kind, almost overly so. They blessed him with generous extra servings, smiling like they'd been waiting for his arrival. He ate alongside Astor and the other two guys again today. Afterward, the four of them made their way to the Coliseum. Unfortunately, they couldn't relax or take in the moment. Their match was scheduled as the first of the day. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Usually, in the early hours, the Coliseum saw sparse attendance. It wasn't until late morning or afternoon that the seats filled up. But today was different. Today marked the continuation of the contest, and it was Northern's team opening the event. The result? People had risen before dawn, traveling from all across Variolania just to witness the spectacle. Many weren't content with simply attending. They wanted the front row, to see every movement, every flicker of power, up close. And they weren't the only ones. The agents of the Citadels, 6 of the most powerful and influential organizations in Ultrael, made no effort to blend in today. Their presence was loud, proud, and brimming with silent threats. These 6 citadels were known not only for their strength, but for their deep-rooted connections with the Academy. And today, all 6 occupied the front row, cloaked in an air of cutthroat rivalry. Tension bled into the seats like smoke, cold, invisible, but felt in every heartbeat. As Northern stepped onto the stage, a sudden voice cracked through the rising noise. Hey, flower boy! Northern! His brow furrowed. He scanned the distant crowd with a quiet grimace, then his eyes widened in recognition, surprise flashing across his face. What are those two doing here? He muttered under his breath. One face stirred warmth. The other? Not so much. She was the 3rd member of Raven's cohort, the one he disliked most. And if memory served right, she had once been her teacher. Cold, arrogant, and difficult. He'd dropped both their names as potential candidates for Therian Citadel. They must be here on behalf of the Citadel. But that raised another question. If he was already part of Therian Citadel, why were they here mingling with the other citadels? What purpose did their presence serve in this recruitment brawl? He already belonged to them, even though partially. Northern shook off the thought. It was a distraction, and he had no time for distractions. He shifted his stance and narrowed his gaze toward his incoming opponents. Meanwhile, across the arena, a dark-haired boy sat with his arms casually crossed. His skin was pale like polished stone, his onyx eyes gleaming with energy and mischief. He wore a sleeveless black ensemble, elegant yet simple, that revealed the lean strength lining his arms. His grin was wide, childlike, and impossible to ignore. Beside him, a blonde-haired woman exhaled and folded her arms across her lacking chest. Her posture radiated discomfort, and she didn't bother hiding her disdain. "I really hate this kind of job," she muttered. The boy tilted his head toward her, a frown puckering his brow. "Oh, come on. Don't act like you're not happy to see him again. It's only been 3 months, but it feels like a lifetime." Helena gave no answer at first. Her gaze followed Northern's form across the arena. Her expression was flat, almost cold. But there was softness at the edges, a quiet pang of something unspoken. Then she scoffed lightly. "And he seems to have grown tremendously in that time." Ellis lit up at her words. "Of course he has. He's Northern, the GOAT. Helena winced, her eye twitching at the phrase. What a strange thing to say. What does that even mean? "Greatest of all time," Ellis replied without missing a beat. "Then just say greatest of all time. Why coin it into some bizarre acronym?" Ellis looked off for a moment, genuinely contemplating her logic. But the thought only lasted a second before he snapped back with a grin. "Because it sounds better that way. It has aura." Helena gave him a side eye that suggested she was already regretting her life decisions. "Isn't this a stellar opportunity?" Ellis beamed, eyes practically sparkling. "The first time I set eyes on him again, and I get to see him fight. I'm so happy I could fly." Helena shook her head, exasperated. But she couldn't deny that part of her understood exactly how he felt. They hadn't come here by accident. The headmaster had personally requested they attend on behalf of the Therian Citadel, to ensure no other citadel tried to lure Northern away. Though Northern was already under contract, the man wasn't taking any chances. Rumors were swirling through the ranks of the citadels. Talk of a strange student rising through the academy with terrifying momentum. The rumors had grown wild enough that the strongest citadel in the Central Plains was allegedly considering making an offer. Thalen insisted he wasn't worried about Northern's loyalty. He just didn't trust the other citadels. But Helena knew better. She saw right through it. That's exactly what he's afraid of, she thought. He's scared Northern might see a better offer and walk away. And that fear explained everything. Thalen had sent not just anyone, but the 2 people Northern had a personal connection with. That guy's such a cunning old fox. Still, she couldn't help but feel a rush of adrenaline. The rumors surrounding Northern had reached absurd heights, each version more ridiculous than the last. Some said he had summoned 1,000 comets and painted the winter sky with fire. Others whispered he could fly, faster than light, they claimed. Some swore he could freeze entire cities in moments. None of it matched the Northern she remembered. Since when could he fly? She scoffed inwardly. No way. That has to be fake. Right? But now she'd get to see for herself. See what it was about him that inspired such wild tales. And in that truth, she'd find out just how much he'd changed. The arena stage rippled with movement as a figure stepped forward. "Hey, friend." The voice came from a calm, almost lazy swagger. A boy strolled onto the stage, 2 swords slung across his back. His presence dripped confidence. He was dressed like a native ninja, but his attire was strange, woven from shadows themselves, it seemed. Black, rippling like liquid night. An onyx breastplate clung to his torso, glinting faintly under the light. A long blue scarf coiled around his neck, fluttering behind him with each step like a trail of mist. He spread his arms wide in greeting. Muscles shifted beneath his sleeveless garb, fluid, agile, and coiled with power. "Remember what I said?" Kalen's grin was sharp. In a blur, his hands moved, and his twin blades shimmered. Purple light flashed along their edges as they appeared in his grip. Already drawn, already ready. No holding back. Chapter 893. Kalen vs. Rian Part 1. Northern looked at him tiredly, then summoned the illusioned hefter. The sleek silver blade gleamed wickedly as it caught the cold morning light, a bright sheen dancing across its polished edge like a silent threat. Kalen continued his slow approach, deliberate with each step. When he saw Northern summon a sword, and worse, a single-handed one, he squinted, visibly irritated. "Do you seriously plan to not take this seriously? You promised." Northern grimaced. "What do you mean? This is me taking it seriously." Kalen was quiet for a moment. Then he raised his chin slightly, a spark of offense flashing through his voice. "I warn you, Rian. That sword is a poor match against me. You've got ice, fire. What about those? Why force short range when you're built to dominate from a distance?" Northern's brow twitched as though a headache had just bloomed behind his eyes. He shrugged lazily. "It seems no one has learned their lesson yet." Then his gaze sharpened, pinning Kalen with a cold glint. "Please, stop talking. And come at me." A demented grin overturned Kalen's composed facade. His upper body leaned forward, swords swinging behind him like wings. One foot dragged back across the arena floor, cracking the concrete under the strain of coiled power. "You asked for it. Don't disappoint me now." With a shout, Kalen vanished. It was a blur. No, a distortion. His form seemed to disintegrate into the wind, skidding across the ground with impossible speed. The crowd gasped. It wasn't just fast, it was confusing, like watching a phantom stitched into space and time rip its threads loose. Even Northern raised the corner of his lips, intrigued. Kalen was a streak of violet light, hurtling toward him like a bullet fired from the cannon of a colossus compressed into a human body. His twin swords blurred through the air and came crashing down onto Northern's head. There was no hesitation, no trial swing. It was full force, both blades hammering down like guillotines. Northern raised the illusioned hefter just in time to block. The clash exploded with force. A vicious shockwave tore outward, rattling the very bones of the arena. The ground beneath them cracked and shattered. Debris rose skyward, caught in reverse gravity, a chaotic bloom of destruction. Northern felt the pressure scream through his arms. His fingers strained to keep hold. The illusioned hefter let out a hollow vibration, an eerie hum as the impact registered through its core. What the hell? His mind churned. Maybe it was the state of his degraded body. Maybe that's why the blow hurt so much. But that kind of excuse disgusted him. Kalen Kijar, or whatever cover name he went by, was strong. Very strong. And Northern knew, from here on out it would only get harder. He would be fighting the elites of the elites at Milgard Academy. Something shifted in his expression. As Kalen pressed down, trying to drive him into the ground, a new light ignited in Northern's eyes. A dangerous glint. His icy irises sparked with a twisted gleam, equal parts thrill and madness. Then, all at once, he lashed out. A pulse of strength exploded from his body, blasting away the force. Kalen was thrown into the air, but he spun mid-flight with the elegance of a sky dancer, blades trailing light. He twisted, rolled, and landed softly on the ground, sliding back a few feet with the grace of someone who had done this far too many times before. He looked up at Northern. That demented grin returned. A faint violet glow flared in his eyes. "There it is, my friend. Let us enjoy this moment to the fullest." Kalen spun one of his blades into the air, letting it whirl like a silver cyclone before catching it just before it dropped an inch. The moment it touched his palm, his body blurred, vanishing again in a streak of violet light that slashed across the air like lightning. The ground smudged beneath his feet as he accelerated. Faster than before, faster than thought. He reappeared in front of Northern, and his blades came down in a brutal arc, sharp and pressuring with merciless momentum. But Northern stepped back slightly, eyes cool. With a flick of his wrist, he brought the illusioned hefter upward from below. He caught Kalen's first blade and guided it outward with a smooth redirection, then whipped his hand back around fast enough to parry the second sword with an upward deflection. All in one fluid, flashing motion. The speed was insane. Neither of their movements could be tracked easily. Only the blur of limbs and the echo of clashing steel remained. Kalen's twin blades began weaving intricate patterns, arcs layered atop arcs, slashes folding in on themselves like a deadly dance. Northern responded with one sword, and it was enough. He followed every rhythm, carried every motion, redirected and absorbed each slash as though he had practiced the very patterns Kalen now used. The illusioned hefter flowed like water and struck like wind, parrying and guiding violent strikes away with surgical control. Cantaloupe orange sparks burst through the air with every clash. Shock waves rippled out in overlapping rings, colliding in midair and cracking the arena floor beneath their feet. Northern didn't move from his spot. No matter how Kalen shifted angles, no matter how low or high the attack came, Northern's blade was already there. Meeting him, countering him, stopping him. Every strike carried weight. And while Kalen pressed the offense with escalating fury, Northern handled it with unnerving ease. He wasn't unscathed. His brows furrowed slightly as if mildly inconvenienced, but he was holding ground. It was tough, yes, but still manageable. Kalen, on the other hand, wasn't hiding his frustration. His grin had twisted into a grimace, his strikes now more furious, more raw. As he lashed out in another vicious barrage, he spat out through gritted teeth. "So you're just gonna stand there and block? This is what you call going all out?" Northern tilted his head slightly, face calm, almost bored. "Then will you be kind enough to step back, so I can begin my round of attack?" Kalen's eyes twitched. He snarled and suddenly withdrew one sword, thrusting forward with a violent grunt. Northern's eyes widened, belatedly. The blade pierced the air with a screech, and the sheer force of the thrust tore the wind apart. A horizontal shockwave screamed across the stage, its edge slicing clean through the ground like a guillotine of pressure. Northern spun out of its path just in time. The attack whooshed past him, erupting into a burst of gale-force wind that tore a long gash across the arena floor. Northern's feet skidded back slightly from the aftershock. His eyes narrowed. "Oh!" Chapter 894. Kalen vs. Rian Part 2. Northern's gaze rested impassively on the smooth gash carved across the arena floor, stretching from the point of impact all the way to the far edge. It looked as though half the stage was on the verge of splitting in two. Then, slowly, he shifted his eyes back to Kalen, who was now tapping the flat of his sword against his shoulder, chin raised, eyes brimming with satisfied glee. "See? Told you. I wasn't joking with you." Northern remained silent. Was he taking Kalen lightly? Not exactly. He wouldn't be that disrespectful, not to someone who had at least earned a place on the stage. But that didn't mean Kalen's constant yapping or noble pride mattered in the slightest. The truth was simple. Northern had treated every opponent with the same cold efficiency. And the fact that he could keep up with Kalen's high-speed movements in his current weakened state only proved what he suspected from the start. The boy was average at best. Even with all the flair, those flashy sword arcs, the flamboyant movement, Kalen lacked in key areas. He was loud, but not sharp, eccentric, but not precise. Northern exhaled. He lifted the illusioned hefter slightly, its silver edge catching the arena lights as his eyes glowed with a composed fire. "I was intrigued. For a moment." His voice was calm, detached. "But it seems it was all for nothing." He shrugged. "Come again." Kalen's face twisted, his teeth clenched, and with a burst of speed he launched forward. His twin blades screamed through the wind, slicing the air so violently it forced the atmosphere itself to recoil. He reappeared in front of Northern, slamming both swords downward with tremendous force, an impact that cracked the earth and split the air. Northern held firm. One hand, one sword, no movement. His expression remained blank. Then, just for a flicker, one corner of his mouth curled up. Kalen's pupils dilated. Did he just scoff? But it was too late. Northern shifted his hands slightly, an almost imperceptible motion that disrupted the equilibrium between their blades. Kalen's stance buckled. In the blink of an eye he was sliding forward, off balance. His eyes widened as confusion crashed over him. He stabbed one of his swords into the ground, catching himself mid-fall. But that wasn't the point. The opening had already been created. Northern's leg flashed upward with brutal precision. The kick smashed into both Kalen's planted sword and his exposed abdomen, bludgeoning the air from his lungs. His face twisted from the impact. Blood burst from his mouth as his body hurled through the air like a missile, carving through the wind. He crashed into the far end of the Colosseum with a thunderous shockwave, the tremor rocking the stadium floor. Northern calmly lowered his leg and placed his foot back on the ground. He exhaled again. His sword style is gibberish. It would have been better if he'd said it to Kalen's face. But the Kijar Scion was already halfway across the Colosseum. Just then, a tremor rocked part of the Colosseum. From within the rising dust, something sharp and fast broke through the haze, cutting across the sky like a fragment of vengeance. People in the front rows screamed as the shockwave hit. Debris scattered, and many were caught in the blast. The crash had happened so suddenly, so violently, that few had time to react. Some were thrown from their seats. Others shielded themselves too late. But the academy personnel were already in motion, rushing forward, tending to the wounded. Yet no one dared pause the fight. The tension in the arena was too volatile. The battle had reached that point. Too intense, too unforgiving to allow even a heartbeat of hesitation. From the air, Kalen dropped like a pillar of judgment. Blades first, fury condensed into momentum. His descent screamed power. But Northern's gaze remained unreadable. He had gathered enough combat experience in his short years as a drifter to know when power became a handicap. This was one of those moments. It's too heavy, too telegraphed, too wasteful. Kalen had speed, blistering speed, and strength. His lean, coiled muscles compressed enough force to match 10 bulls in a charge. But strength and speed, without control, were just chaos in a different dress. He was leveraging everything he had in every move. All in. And Northern understood why. Kalen must have realized early on that Northern wasn't the kind of opponent one could afford to conserve energy against. So he poured out everything. But that recklessness was exactly what doomed him. If Northern hadn't mastered the footsteps of chaos, perhaps Kalen's pressure would have overwhelmed him. But he had. And that changed everything. The essence of Chaos Eyes and the demon of emulation was simple. Dissect, dismantle, and absorb. With each movement Kalen made, Northern understood more of his combat rhythm, and more importantly, where it broke down. Kalen was brute strength and wild speed but lacked restraint. And sometimes it was restraint that won battles. It was the subtle holdback, the delayed strike, the unseen manipulation of force in a moment where others expected overwhelming power. Chaos footsteps had taught him that early on. And now it showed. As Kalen came crashing down like a divine punishment, Northern raised his sword like he meant to block, then vanished in a blur. He pulled back, shifting his body just slightly, letting Kalen fall harder, closer to the ground. And just as Kalen descended, Northern's sword twisted downward, its pommel driving toward the underside of Kalen's jaw. But Kalen was fast. Though belated, the moment Northern shifted, Kalen moved. He didn't know what his strange friend was about to do. But the moment he saw that shift, his instincts kicked in. He spun away mid-air, narrowly evading the brutal pommel strike by a hair's breadth. His eyes widened in that flash of survival. He landed, staggered, trying to create distance. But Northern was already there. A wide, sweeping kick slammed into the side of Kalen's head with crushing force. Wham! His ears rang. The world tilted. His vision blurred into streaks of light and phantom outlines. His body swayed as his knees buckled. Balance lost, awareness fading like smoke in the wind. Kalen stumbled backward, arms flailing. The crowd gasped, and Northern stood still, unreadable. His sword lowered, his expression impassive as he waited for Kalen to recover from the stun and get himself. Chapter 895. Kalen vs. Rian Part 3. Kalen stood in silence for a few seconds, his chest heaving. He shut his eyes tightly and opened them again, blinking several times as he struggled to clear his vision. The world was still spinning, but thanks to Northern's patience, he had a moment to steady himself. The stadium held its breath in stunned silence. The movement, the kick, had been sharp, precise, and devastating. It was a miracle Kalen was even still standing. For the entire Colosseum to fall into a perfect hush like that, all at once, one could only imagine how tremendous the impact had been. And that strike had landed straight on his head. Northern stood quietly, watching him. Of course, he could have ended it all in one smooth move if he wanted to. Just like the Kijar Scion had claimed at the start of the match, Northern had options. Many of them. But it wasn't every day he found someone who was good at both speed and strength. Someone who knew combat, not just its movements, but its essence, its splendid ladder. Northern felt a flicker of excitement. He didn't want it to end just yet. He wanted to stretch Kalen to his limits. And the boy clearly wasn't finished. Not yet. Since the match began, he hadn't even used his talent. Northern wanted to see what it was, and how Kalen would combine it with swordsmanship. He was genuinely curious. Kalen took a few more moments, squinting, blinking. Then, finally, his balance returned. He scowled, tilted his head, and spat blood onto the floor. Then his stance changed. Before, he'd leaned his upper body forward, sword drawn to his back. Now he crossed his arms, holding both swords in reverse grip. They were short swords, not too long, not too short. Just perfect for whatever style he was about to reveal. A purple light flickered in his eyes, menacing and electric. Even though he'd just taken a brutal hit, one that made many spectators pity him, Kalen still radiated enough aura to make everyone sit back up, their anticipation rising. His blades exhaled a faint, ghostly purple smoke. Northern frowned. He still didn't know what Kalen's talent was. But he was about to find out. Wham! Kalen blasted forward, so fast he seemed to vanish, and unleashed his crossed arms midair. A radiant X-shaped slash of flaring purple energy surged toward Northern. But all Northern did was extend one hand. Void force shimmered invisibly in front of him. The slash collided with it and collapsed instantly. But something else followed. A chain. It snapped out of the burst like a serpent, latching tightly onto Northern's wrist. He looked down at it, unamused. The chain glowed with violet energy, like it had been forged from Kalen's very essence. His talent, huh? You have discovered talent, chainbound. You do not have enough copy slot. Northern stared at the glowing shackle now bound to his wrist, his expression unreadable. What does this change? He asked flatly. You used the slash as a decoy to plant this on me. Do you really think that gives you any kind of leverage? Kalen tilted his head, his voice cool. You're certainly arrogant. Understandable, considering how powerful you are. He lifted his own arm. The chain on Northern's wrist was connected to his. The ability I used is called Shackle Lash. Once bound, it cuts your movement speed and halves your essence flow. And it won't break, unless my essence drops low. He smirked. And as it happens, I've got essence to spare. Northern regarded the chain without a hint of urgency. I see. You have changed your name. Northern twisted the chain around his hand slowly, then yanked. Hard. Kalen's eyes widened a fraction, but by then it was too late. The chain snapped tight like a noose, dragging him forward with the momentum of a mountain. He was utterly helpless against the titanic force. In a blink, he was pulled straight into Northern's space. Northern's fist clenched, so tight the air around it trembled, then cracked. A thunderclap rang out. Then the punch landed square into Kalen's stomach. Boom! The boy's body folded around the blow, and he flew like a ragdoll. Northern watched as Kalen dove through the wind and crashed into the base of the Colosseum with blistering, and even more terrifying, speed than before. The entire arena trembled violently on impact. But thankfully, this time the crash had landed low, just below the first row of seats. Mouths fell open, gasps rippled. The spectators stared, then turned, exchanging wild looks between the crash site and the boy who had thrown the punch. He's supposed to be a non-combative student, for Star's sake. Man, he sure can throw punches. What the hell? Does he have super strength too? I feel like the walls of my mental health are collapsing just watching this guy fight. What is going on? Does he have multiple talents? Who on earth could beat him? Voices overlapped and erupted across the crowd. Confused, shocked, amazed. Everyone had their own words, their own version of disbelief. But one thing tied all their reactions together. Astonishment. Sheer, unfiltered astonishment. Because the supposedly non-combative student was more combative than anyone from the Academy's actual combative campus could ever hope to be. Northern, meanwhile, paid no mind to the murmurs or attention. He simply stood there, eyes locked on the gaping hole at the base of the Colosseum. Dust cloaked the crater like a smokescreen, veiling its interior from view. He couldn't tell what lay inside, not yet. More importantly, the chain had broken easily when his punch connected. Whatever was left of it was now dissolving into the air like mist from a dream. Still, his curiosity lingered. He wanted to know, did Kalen survive that hit? Nah, I don't think he would've. Kalen was probably a master at best. And Northern didn't believe a master could withstand a punch from Titan's reckoning. Especially not when reinforced with colossal force. That strike could crack the foundation of a mountain when unleashed in full. Northern hadn't gone all out, but he wasn't sure how much force he'd actually used. His body, in this weakened state, had made it harder to gauge. Measuring output with precision was a hassle. He exhaled slowly, fingers flexing. A part of him genuinely hoped he hadn't done permanent damage to Kalen. Then something moved. A silhouette began to form through the settling haze. It stepped through the dust like a phantom being carved from fog. Northern's eyes twitched. A pale grin tugged at the corner of his lips. No way. Chapter 896. Kalen vs. Rian Part 4. Northern's grin trembled, caught in an almost perverse amusement. To think he would survive that. No matter how much he had held back, a maelstrom would have been pulverized beneath the mighty punch he'd thrown. He couldn't help but award Kalen the trophy he so rightfully deserved. This bastard is tough as nails. Of course, the young Kijar scion wasn't emerging unscathed. In truth, he looked better off dead than in his current state. He barely walked, dragging himself forward, his face marred with crimson patches and his jaw painted scarlet. When he parted his lips to grit against the pain, his teeth gleamed red like blood-stained pearls. His once pristine armor had vanished. Whether he'd dismissed it or Northern's punch had obliterated it remained unclear. This left him in skin-tight black underclothes that contoured every edge of his frame, making him appear carved from onyx stone despite his pitiful condition. For a fleeting moment, Northern considered ending the fight. But he shook his head. No, that would be an insult to him. He managed to stand. I should honor that. Northern didn't claim to know much about honor. Yet Aisha had instilled in him valuable lessons and principles that were surfacing now as he engaged his mind, reorganizing his thoughts and refusing to define everything through the lens of the things that happened in the Dark Continent. Perhaps he owed this recent development to Roma. Northern fixed Kalen with a piercing glare, his lips curving into a slight smile. This is it, friend. Go hard right now or go home. Kalen responded with a frenzied grin, his blood-stained teeth transforming him into something truly demented. He ignored his body's sorry state and clenched both swords tightly, arms extending horizontally outward. He didn't speak. Not yet. Or perhaps he was too injured to form words. Kalen snarled furiously and shot forward. Despite his wounds, his speed suffered no reduction. He blazed forward in a furious streak of purple light, a blur to the naked eye. He clashed against Northern's sword with such tremendous power that Northern's eyes widened in shock. Shock waves rippled outward in concentric circles, drowning the air in vicious pressure. A heartbeat later, the entire ground followed suit. Shrapnels of stone, as if diced into perfect cubes by some artistic butcher, rose into the air and scattered from the intense force surrounding both fighters. Several onlookers scrambled for shelter. Students with shield-type talents sprang into action, protecting the line of civilians, a deliberate safety measure implemented by the student council after witnessing how dangerous the battle had become. Northern felt the brunt of the power press against him, nearly buckling beneath its intensity. But of course he wouldn't yield. He pushed back with formidable force, launching Kalen away with a decisive forward thrust. The Kijar scion flew helplessly through the air. Before he could land, Northern materialized behind him, eyes streaking with cold blue light. He twirled midair and delivered a picture-perfect airborne 360-degree kick that altered Kalen's trajectory, hurling him forward and sending him reeling across the arena floor. Kalen's body tumbled like wreckage from a catastrophic collision before finally skidding to a halt at the arena's edge. For several agonizing seconds, Kalen remained motionless, unable to summon the strength to stand. Northern approached with cold, dignified grace, only to halt mid-step as something caught his attention. He raised his hand to his nose, then examined the finger that had touched it. There was blood. His blood. Damn. The clone's body was already approaching its limit. He could feel it, tissue breaking down, energy depleting. He needed to end this quickly. While Northern was momentarily distracted, Kalen had silently extended his hand. As Northern prepared to advance, he suddenly found himself immobilized. Northern frowned and glanced downward. Purple chains wrapped desperately around both ankles, locking him to the ground with merciless grip. Kalen was already struggling to his feet, blood cascading down one side of his face, rendering him a portrait of miserable yet picturesque heroism. Northern shook his head. "You just never learn, do you?" Kalen's lips curled into a nasty grin. "Not when you're such a poor teacher." He surged forward again, a purple flash cutting through the air. This time, serpentine chains erupted from his body, streaking wickedly ahead, desperately seeking to crush Northern beneath their malicious might. Northern stood impassive before the onslaught. He downturned his lips, watching as the chains smashed through empty air, never quite reaching him. Confusion etched itself across Kalen's face, briefly disrupting his focus as he hovered above Northern. He dove in nonetheless, blades dancing in an intricate twirl as he descended upon his opponent. Northern raised his sword, hands swift and precise as he intercepted the sequence of strikes that Kalen wove. Their combat transformed into a deadly dance. Each movement flowed into the next, a downward slash transitioning to a diagonal upward strike delivered by the second sword. With flawless precision, Kalen flipped one blade, gripping it in reverse to execute an upward vertical slash. He launched it skyward with impeccable timing before attempting an overhead thrust which Northern easily sidestepped, the blade whistling harmlessly past his chest. Rather than allowing momentum to carry him forward, Kalen retracted with graceful footwork and pivoted in an unconventional manner that sparked Northern's amusement. "Oh, looks like he's learning on his own after all." Still, it proved futile. Northern moved too quickly for such nascent growth to matter. Before Kalen could complete his pivot, Northern's palm shot out, crushing against his opponent's arm. It was a simple strike, yet a shockwave tore through the air as Kalen was catapulted backward, somersaulting and tumbling across the ground once more. Northern looked down as the ground beneath him began to crystallize. The chains frosted over, and with a casual flex of his leg, he shattered the frozen restraints and strode forward. "Look, friend, there are several ways I could end you. This battle could have been over before it began, had I wished it so. While I find your earnest attempt to challenge me rather amusing, it doesn't change the fundamental truth of your standing compared to mine." Northern halted as he reached the fallen scion of the Kijar clan. "You all harbor a certain resentment toward us students of the Dark Continent, don't you? Deep down, you're desperate to prove, perhaps to me, perhaps to yourself or your clan, that you possess strength equal to ours, despite the differences in our environments." He gazed down at Kalen, a cold glow illuminating his eyes. "But you don't. You might wield an A-class talent or even SSS class, I don't particularly care. Someone with a mere C-class talent from the Dark Continent would outperform you because they've had to survive the world's true harshness. Your abilities, while impressive, have blossomed in pools of nurturing care and optimal conditions. Ours emerged from quite the opposite." He raised his chin, positioning his foot above Kalen's head. "Tell me, friend, how could you possibly compete against that reality? It's futile. No matter what you attempt, our environment has created such a vast chasm between us that no amount of effort can bridge it. His voice softened, almost compassionate in its finality. Just accept it. Chapter 897. Finish what you started. Northern stared down at Kalen, his casual white shoe hovering ominously above the fallen warrior's head. His eyes gleamed like ice, cold, unforgiving. Kalen lay silent for several heartbeats, sprawled on the ground as every fiber of his muscles twisted in excruciating agony. Only now, as defeat crept into his consciousness, did he truly comprehend the devastating impact of Northern's strikes. Only now did he witness the chasm between them. The last move, Kalen had been certain he possessed superior speed. Despite Northern's quickness, speed and strength had always been his clan's birthright, their unquestionable advantage. Yet Northern had demonstrated a velocity beyond comprehension, a blur too swift for the eye to track. Kalen couldn't even identify what Northern had struck him with that had sent such violent discord rippling through his entire body. But Northern's words cut deeper than his blows. With monumental effort, Kalen stirred beneath the raised foot, struggling but ultimately succeeding in propping himself up to a seated position. He fixed Northern with a stern grimace, his bloodied face demanding a respect that Northern almost felt compelled to give. But Northern stood far above such sentiments. His cold, impassive glare never wavered. Kalen took measured breaths as he sat, deliberately inhaling and exhaling to steady himself. Rian's foot now rested on the ground. His frigid eyes bore down like an oppressive weight, but Kalen had reached a stubborn defiance beyond caring. After the weighted silence, his dry, breaking voice finally sliced through the air. What nonsense are you spouting? Blossomed in pools of nurturing care? Rian, you don't know jack about me to claim all that. And you see, that's the thing about all of you from the Dark Continent. He winced but continued. You think existing in this continent wasn't a crucible of its own? You think we didn't fight tooth and nail every day for survival? Northern interrupted, his voice razor-sharp. Fight for what exactly, Kalen? From your swordsmanship teacher who might punish you if you skip class? Or from your prestigious father whose expectations press upon you like the weight of the world? Northern shook his head, frustration radiating from him in palpable waves. You people just don't grasp the reality. No matter how we try to communicate it, you just don't get it. And you never will. You can't fathom what it means to live in a city besieged by monsters, to battle alongside creatures of horror, to form bonds with abominations only to face them in mortal combat later, to be mentored by the very entities you're destined to destroy. His voice lowered to a dangerous whisper, his eyelids drooping halfway. And no matter how I try to explain this to you, your sheltered mind simply cannot comprehend. He paused, the silence deafening. And that's fine, Kalen. In the next instant, a vibrant, dangerous light ignited in Northern's blue eyes, like twin flames in a frozen sea. He shrugged slightly, lips curling into a predatory smile. It's simple, really. If you believe the difference isn't so great, if you think your effort can bridge the gap, then stand up and defeat me. Kalen gritted his teeth until his jaw ached. Ebony stars, how he wanted to stand. He craved nothing more than to rise to his feet and continue the fight. But only now did he realize how severely he had depleted himself with those bursts of speed. Their battle had barely lasted 3 minutes, yet his legs had already betrayed him. Worse still, waves of agony rippled through his body. Standing was impossible, no matter how fiercely his pride demanded it. His hands, though no longer clutching his swords, remained locked in a death grip, trembling as if he'd been holding the blades for 10 years without rest. The sheer force behind each of his attacks had strained his muscles to the point where he couldn't even extend his fingers. Kalen glanced up at the student towering above him. A tempest brewed in his eyes, a volatile mixture of anger, envy, grudging respect, and raw hatred. Fighting Northern had been more than challenging. It had been utterly exhausting. Beyond the guy's counters and blocks, Simply mustering the strength and speed necessary to elicit any worthwhile reaction from someone of his caliber demanded more than students like themselves could possibly sustain. And that was the true measure of the gap between them. The realization struck him like a physical blow. Northern stared down at him, expression unreadable. "So, what's it going to be, friend?" The last word dripped with thinly veiled contempt. Kalen felt shame wash over him. Having boasted so boldly only to end up in this pathetic state. He had maneuvered himself into an unexpected quagmire of his own creation. Now, he faced the humiliation of forfeiting the fight. His thoughts raced to his clan. Who among them might be here, disguised, watching both him and his younger sister to report back to their father? What would their father's verdict be when they eventually concluded this juvenile adventure and returned home to assume their rightful positions within the clan? A Kejar never surrenders. The words escaped his lips like a sacred mantra. Northern's brow furrowed slightly as Kalen muttered the declaration. "Knock me out. Finish what you started." Northern's frown deepened, shadows gathering across his features. "Really? Are you that stupid? Blinded by pride?" Kalen smiled, but Northern recognized it instantly. The hollow curve of lips that couldn't mask the anguish beneath. A smile worn like poorly fitting armor. "As you said, Rian, some of us bear the crushing weight of expectations from an overbearing father. Maybe I'll never truly grasp your perspective or the brutal world that forged you, but we too were robbed of our childhood by these relentless expectations. We've had no life to call our own, no decisions were ever truly ours to make. We have never truly lived. All we've done since birth was chase the overwhelming shadow of what the past era used to be. This was a different hell in and of itself. One people like you have no idea of." He tilted his head slightly, a gesture both defiant and resigned. "So, yes, Rian, I am that stupid and blinded by pride." His eyes ignited with a defiant light, his expression hardening like cooling steel. "Now, finish what you started." Chapter 898. The Angel of Death. Northern had never tasted defeat so bitter. For the first time in his life, he felt genuinely conflicted. These nurtured kids, perhaps they had a right to their hurt. They'd endured their own sufferings. Yet the hell that Northern and his peers had been thrown into, and its aftermath, had made those sufferings seem like mere childish whimpers. But they had a point too. Or maybe Northern felt this way because of his own upbringing. His childhood had been good, better than the old world, in fact. It was the one thing he cherished. Perhaps that was why Kalen's words stung so deeply. They planted seeds of guilt in his heart. To compound matters, he now had to face Kalen's sister. After Northern had knocked Kalen unconscious with a swift kick, attendants had carried him from the arena. Now Soraya strode toward Northern, a large box slung across her back. She halted before him and dropped the box to the ground. A deafening bang echoed throughout the Colosseum as the container split open. With fluid grace, Soraya gripped a lithe black rod from within. She swung it skyward, and the weapon began to transform. By the time it reached its apex, a wicked, sharp scythe blade had emerged, gleaming coldly as it reflected daylight with silvery elegance. She gripped the death scythe at its base, positioning it above her like an umbrella of destruction. The sight of her was mesmerizing, sinister yet beautiful, like an angel of death incarnate. Northern gulped and released the illusion's sword from his hands, letting it dissipate into sparks that scattered through the air like dying embers. A small, adorable frown creased Soraya's face, her purple eyes gleaming with intensity. "What are you doing? Relinquishing your sword?" Northern met her gaze evenly as he extended his empty hand. "I plan to face you with everything I've got. So come at me with everything you've got." Soraya's frown darkened, her expression growing wary. She pushed her right leg slightly forward, bending into a combat stance as the scythe fell, but didn't strike the ground. Her second hand caught the fall by gripping the middle of the shaft, the razor-sharp edge of the blade hovering just above the ground, almost kissing it. Then she twirled the shaft of the death scythe, gracefully tracing an arc of destruction that stopped in a semicircle above her head. She fixed Northern with one more calculated glare and launched herself forward. Her speed seemed nothing like Kalen's at first glance, initially appearing underwhelming, only for Northern's eyes to suddenly widen as he vanished from his position the instant Soraya's blade carved through the air where he had stood. He frowned, thoughts racing. What was that? If he didn't possess a teleportation ability, he was certain the young girl's attack would have caught him. She didn't appear as fast as Kalen, but somehow she was faster. Northern felt confusion course through him, but wasn't bothered in the slightest. This was merely another opportunity to emulate her technique. The girl wasted no time. She shifted instantly and flowed forward again, dashing toward Northern with the grace of a falling blossom. A sweet, flowery scent trailed in the wake of her movement. Northern took a powerful leap backward while simultaneously changing his name. As he landed, he extended his hand with purpose. Ice spears materialized in the air, each one twisting forward with cold, serene precision. She was charging when the ice spears bombarded her position. But Soraya moved with flawless precision, her movements vivid and deliberate. She swung the scythe as if wielding silk, dancing gracefully despite her silently blistering speed. The scythe let out a soft, cold whisper, metal subtly grazing metal, as it cleaved through the ice spears, leaving their separated halves to glisten beautifully beneath the sun's radiance. Soraya embodied a graceful dance. She rolled through the air, swung the death scythe and brought it down on another spear, effortlessly cleaving it in two. She halted the scythe's momentum with controlled strength, redirecting it to slice through another ice spear descending from above. In the same fluid motion, she launched herself upward, rolling through the air, grace embodied in her every movement. The ground beneath where she had stood froze solid the moment she soared skyward. Then she landed on the ground again with perfect poise. Northern moved his hands with subtle precision. Ice spears began to jut out of the frozen ground, hunting her as she moved, but she remained elusive, skidding across the icy terrain with masterful control. At certain points, Northern thought she appeared to be ice skating. It did indeed look exactly like that. Northern continued to observe as she glided across the ice expanse, effortlessly evading the ice spears that erupted from the frozen ground. At intervals, she would launch herself skyward in fluid flips and perfect somersaults. Even when spears charged toward her mid-flight, her scythe would twirl instantly, cleaving through them with breathtaking precision. Her movements embodied such profound grace that it seemed as though eloquence itself had taken physical form. A young dark-skinned girl wielding a wicked death scythe, yet radiating the divine presence of an angel, if this world possessed any. Northern found himself enraptured, but something felt wrong. He realized he wanted to continue watching her movements. Though he attacked, he felt as though he was merely providing her opportunities to showcase how she would glide, spin, and twirl through the air. It was like wanting to witness more of a ballet dancer's performance, taking actions only to make the dancer shine brighter, even while ostensibly trying to defeat them. He felt strangely unsettled, as if he was somehow serving her purpose. It felt as though his attacks were giving her wings to fly. Northern's brows drew together in a dark line as this peculiar sensation crystallized in his mind.
Ah, no wonder.
It dawned on him why she could anticipate his attacks. Soraya was casting a hex on him. What initially confused Northern was the absence of any notification about copying talent. She hadn't activated any specific ability. Or, could be a passive ability, one that doesn't require explicit activation. Something akin to his spatial awareness now, he could expand or retract it at will, but it required no formal activation as such. This realization meant that Soraya was, in truth, more dangerous and powerful than Kalen had been. Northern scowled, the bitter taste of underestimation filling his mouth. I underestimated her. Chapter 899. Against the World. Northern looked at her again. This time, his gaze carried a strange light of carefulness and resolve, blazing with an ethereal blue radiance. Soraya paused for a moment, hesitating, before she spun her scythe and launched forward. Northern extended one hand upward, two fingers poised before his face. Thin, elongated arrows of fire began to materialize around him, casting a twilight glow across the Colosseum. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though dawn was breaking anew. Then the flames blazed dangerously and streaked forward. As they came, Soraya moved. She flowed in a zigzag pattern, spinning her death scythe as she glided across the landscape, feet barely touching the ground as if gravity itself bent to her will. The first flames made contact. The scythe spun, catching the light in a serene and peaceful dance, resembling a crescent moon brought to life under the harsh daylight. Northern watched something fantastic unfold before his eyes. The blade cleaved right through the spear of flames, causing the halved parts of the arrows to separate and harmlessly pass her by. Without pausing for breath, she sprang into more ferocious motion, her weapon a blur of deadly precision. Silver arcing lights swept across the wind, curving delicately and cleaving the fiery spears as she flowed. At some point, her figure vanished within the fiery bombardment, her presence announced only by the silvery crescent slashes that carved through the air in quick succession, dissecting the flames with surgical precision. Northern's lips parted slightly as he watched. Another volley of arrows was already forming at his command. But this was shocking. She can cut fire? Technically, that should not be possible. Of course, in a world like this one, impossibility was a fragile concept at best. Still, it was exceedingly rare to witness a weapon that could cut through fire. Not merely separate it, but literally cut through. That was gold. And suddenly, it made sense why she could also slice through his ice with such ease. A corner of Northern's lips curled upward. Perhaps I should raise the bar a little higher then. So far, Northern had been remarkably merciful with his opponent whenever he employed abilities from Frostheart and Sun's Legacy, especially Sun's Legacy. Not because he harbored any mercy for his opponent. It was never about them at all. Rather, it stemmed from the sheer firepower these talents commanded. It was like trying to kill an ant with a revolver. The ant would certainly die, but its death would be the least of one's concerns in the aftermath. These abilities were simply too powerful to be employed carelessly. At least that was how he perceived it. But lately, he'd been feeling rather tempted to test his limits. All this while, the ability of Sun's Legacy he had been using was Ignis Dominus, which granted him domination over flames. It functioned much like the ice manipulation of Frostheart, allowing him to weave fire into anything as vast as his imagination permitted. The other times he had attempted to use additional abilities from both talents, he witnessed firsthand the devastation they wrought. And Sun's Legacy was far worse. Twilight Phoenix had transformed the landscape of an entire frozen mountain. Half of Variolania could be reformed in the vicious crucible of its flames. And definitely not in a way they'd appreciate. Northern extended his hand to the side and murmured, "Ashen Eternity." Boom! A terrible sound and shockwave tore through the center of the arena, blazing upward with a torrent of vicious blue flames that soared like a vengeful pillar reaching for the heavens. Northern stood there, his expression cold as the subtly dancing column of azure flames consumed his extended hand, stretching skyward in defiance of gravity itself. At the sound of the explosion, Soraya had sliced apart the last of the second volley of fire arrows that had plagued her. She looked skyward with a tight frown, her face draining of color. Just how many cards does he have up his sleeves? She kicked the shaft of her scythe off the floor, spinning it with minimal movement before halting abruptly, causing the blade itself to cleave the wind behind her with a chilling intensity. Northern's arm was now encased in blue flame that blazed upward, dancing softly yet menacingly in the dense air. The pillar of fire cast an ethereal blue glow across the arena. The sight was appalling to behold, mesmerizing, and terrifying in equal measure. Nobody was certain what exactly Northern intended to do with this power, but the mere sight of it made spectators' gazes waver with concern for the girl before him. Hey, shouldn't they just call off the match at this point? She's a girl. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm worried about her too. Bah! To hell with that. Whether male or female, we all deserve the same question. You all weren't worried for her brother just now. I mean, we kind of were, but you know. The conversation faded as the view panned away from the crowds. Similar worried discussions rippled through various sections, the sentiment visible across many expressions. Soraya didn't need to hear them to understand. She was no stranger to such evaluations and pity. After all, she had been raised in a clan that treated her the same way every single day. Despite being insidiously more dangerous and powerful than her brother, the clan elders always found excuses to justify why she would forever be less preferred, why her father never gave them equal attention, and why she was always treated with excessive caution while he enjoyed the privileges of hardcore training that later evoked growth. This was the world she had been fighting against since childhood. Why else would someone like her not be in some young noble's home, breeding children for him while expanding her cosmetic collection with each pitiful passing day? Because she had actively fought against it. She did so every single day of her life, and today was no different. Northern moved, his hands slowly moving backward as he bent his legs into stance, while Soraya braced herself for what was to come. Chapter 900 Bitter Victories. The pillar of flames wrapping Northern's hands swayed hypnotically. Left, then, right. Then with a sudden fearsome blaze, it exploded backward, spilling azure fragments of flames into the sky. The explosion generated a force that propelled Northern forward. He streaked across the expanse, a trail of crackling flames following in his wake. His fist connected with Soraya's death scythe. A massive force erupted on impact. The blue flames in his hands seemed to compress for a moment and suddenly release, causing the entire place to ripple with shock waves and blue flames that radiated outward in a cerulean light circle, subtle sparks charging the air like electric whispers. The ground cracked into thousands of webbed fissures. Some shattered stones flew upward, shooting away like deadly projectiles, while others disintegrated to ash as the voracious blue flames licked them. Northern was genuinely surprised that she could withstand the attack. She gritted her teeth as dark purple shining armor climbed her body like living shadow. But still, she had only the scythe to block the vicious flames. They fiercely swirled around her but were simultaneously repelled as she blocked the initial force of Northern's strike. She deflected it sideways and swung her scythe in a deadly series of cyclonic patterns, generating powerful winds that somehow sucked the flames surrounding her and hurled them away from her back. Then she was bringing her scythe down again, forcing Northern, who was already lunging in for a terrifying strike, to diminish his power and sidestep her attack. Of course, that did very little to stop him either way. His hands shot out like a whip, crushing against her face just as the armor sealed over her features. Her head jerked backward, blood spraying into the air. Northern's hand, the flaming one, had exploded forward again and crashed into her abdomen. For a moment there was silence, then barely a fragment of a second later, a thick layered sound tore through the air from the center of the arena. It was like the rumbling of thunder, a belch from some terrifying creature large enough to sit upon the entirety of Variolania and crush the whole nation beneath its weight. A blue thin circle of light shot out, with a straight azure flame piercing through it towards the sky before dimming like a dying star. Then following it, Soraya soared into the air, violently tumbling and rippling through the atmosphere, her armor turning to white sparks as it shattered to pieces like a constellation being born and dying in an instant. Northern glanced at her. Oh damn, I overestimated her. One couldn't blame him. With the way Soraya blocked the first attack, he thought she would easily deflect the second. He had no idea he'd channeled more force into it than he should have. He looked up, shielding his eyes with his palm to gauge where she was going. Then he hovered in the air, slowly at first, only to suddenly accelerate and streak into the air. At that moment, Ellis and Helena's jaws dropped. Their mouths had perpetually been hanging open since the fight began. This was nothing like the Northern they knew. While Ellis vibrated with excitement, Helena sat appalled. Her face had drained of color. She clutched the rim of the Colosseum's front seat, leaning forward as if ready to launch herself into the arena at any moment. How is that even possible? How does it make sense that he can fly? The people around her exchanged curious glances as her voice rose. They turned to each other and murmured among themselves. I guess she's a first-timer here. It shows. We were that shocked initially too. Indeed. It was difficult to swallow. But is it just me? Or does she seem more terrified than excited? Brother. Different people process things differently. Helena belatedly composed herself and smoothed her expression before sinking back into her seat. Some of their whispers reached her ears. Others didn't. But she didn't need to hear everything to understand that she was the anomaly here, and everyone else. It was as though they had grown accustomed to Northern displaying such power. They reveled in it. They drew joy from it. Suddenly, she understood why such crowds flocked here and why the 6 strongest citadels scrambled against each other for one student. Among many others, of course. But there was a peculiar emphasis on this one. Northern had taken the world by storm. The effect was subtle, but it had definitely begun. While she remained lost in her thoughts, Ellis exhaled with exhilaration and thrust his hands skyward, a massive grin splitting his face. Woo! He's grown so strong. I think 10 times stronger than he used to be. Helena turned to him, her expression ashen. And what's so happy about that? Ellis regarded her with bewilderment. What's not? His gaze drifted toward the sky. Being his first companion and the one who understands him best, I know strength was always what he craved most. I'm glad he finally has it. Ellis's smile turned slightly wistful. Although it seems he still hasn't realized what he truly needs. Helena stared at him for a couple of seconds, her gaze utterly bewildered. She could not find the words to address the moment nor summon the right expression to wear on her face. At that moment, Northern was already descending upon the Colosseum with a young lady cradled in his arms. His feet touched the cratered ground of the arena with angelic grace, and he shifted his piercing gaze toward the examiner. The man belatedly collected himself and sprinted to the middle of the arena as Northern deposited the young lady on the ground. Soraya was barely breathing, but she was alive, albeit completely unconscious. The devastating blow had knocked her out before she even began her skyward journey. Northern glanced down at her with a pitiful expression. She didn't even get a proper chance to use her talent. Why do I feel like a bully today? Northern's lips downturned slightly. His victories tasted rather bitter today. He shifted his gaze to where the supposed 3rd member of Kijar's team should have been. But the spot stood empty. Oh? How unlucky. I was going to give him a win at least. Northern shrugged and strode out of the arena as the announcer bellowed his victory. The crowd's roar washing over him like waves upon shore. The next battle. That's right. The student council president is going to be fighting with a strange team next. A small, anticipatory smile curved Northern's lips. I look forward to it. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.